Hello everyone. Welcome back to Buried Files. Today we return with another bone-chilling collection of authentic testimonies pulled from the deepest, most isolated corners of Appalachia. In this episode, we will venture into the heart of America's most haunted mountain range, with 8 disturbing tales of encounters with entities that should not exist, adapted from first-hand accounts of survivors who barely escaped the ancient woods alive. These are not folklore or campfire stories, but documented experiences from loggers, park rangers, researchers, and locals who have witnessed things that defy rational explanation in the shadowed hollows and forgotten trails of Appalachian territory. Each narrative comes directly from witness testimony, police reports, and missing person files that have been gathering dust in small town archives for decades. To protect the identity of those involved, some names and specific locations have been altered, but the core experiences remain untouched and unfiltered. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Buried Files for daily authentic horror content that will disturb your sleep and question everything you thought you knew about the wilderness around us. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the buried truth surfaces from the darkness. This story comes from Marcus Thompson, whose family has deep roots in the coal mining and logging communities of West Virginia. What we are about to share with you was passed down through 3 generations of his family, and Marcus only agreed to tell it after his grandfather's death in 2019, when he inherited something that would change his understanding of his family's history forever. Marcus grew up hearing whispers about his great-grandfather, Elijah Thompson, who had been a logging foreman in the 1940s in the remote mountains near the Virginia border. Elijah had built a successful operation, employing dozens of men and clearing vast sections of old growth forest for timber companies. But in 1947, the operation shut down abruptly. No explanation was ever given to the workers, and Elijah never spoke about what happened in those final months. The family only knew that he had returned home one day, pale and shaken, and announced that he was done with logging forever. For 70 years, the reason remained a mystery. Elijah took his secrets to the grave, and the old logging roads grew over with thick underbrush and saplings. The equipment was abandoned where it sat, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. The only reminder of the operation was a collection of hand-drawn maps that Elijah had kept locked in a steel box in his basement. Maps that Marcus had never been allowed to see. When Marcus inherited his grandfather's house in 2019, he discovered that steel box among the belongings. Inside were dozens of detailed topographical maps of the logging operation, marked with roads, cutting zones, and equipment locations. But what caught his attention were the red X marks scattered across several maps. Some were drawn over specific areas of forest. Others marked particular roads or clearings. And written in Elijah's shaky handwriting beside many of the X marks were the words, "Do not enter," and "Forbidden ground." Marcus had always been fascinated by his family's logging history, and he saw this as an opportunity to finally understand what had happened to shut down such a profitable operation. He decided to take the maps and explore the old logging roads, thinking he might find some valuable equipment or at least get closure on the family mystery. Looking back now, he realizes that curiosity was the worst mistake of his life. On a cold October morning, Marcus loaded his ATV with camping gear and set out for the abandoned logging roads. The main access road was still partially visible, though decades of growth had narrowed it to barely more than a deer path. Following Elijah's maps, he navigated deeper into the mountains than he had ever been before. The forest here was different from the woods he knew. The trees were older, thicker, and they seemed to block out most of the daylight, even though it was mid-morning. After 2 hours of riding, Marcus reached what his great-grandfather's map indicated was the main equipment depot. Sure enough, he found the rusted remains of several logging trucks and a bulldozer, all being slowly consumed by vines and moss. The sight was both fascinating and eerie. It looked like the workers had simply walked away from their jobs one day and never returned. As Marcus explored the depot, he noticed that one of the maps in his backpack corresponded exactly to this location. And there, marked clearly in red ink, was one of the X marks with "Do Not Enter" written beside it. According to the map, there was a logging road that continued north from the depot, leading to what Elijah had marked as the Big Clearing. But this particular road had multiple red X marks along its length, and at the end, Elijah had written, "Stay away. They do not want us there." Marcus stared at the overgrown path that led north. Every instinct told him to turn around and go home. But he had come this far, and he needed to know what had frightened his great-grandfather so badly that he had abandoned a profitable business and never spoke of it again. Against his better judgment, Marcus started his ATV and headed down the forbidden road. The path was barely passable. Branches scraped against his helmet and thick undergrowth caught at his wheels. But what struck him most was the silence. In all his years of hunting and hiking in West Virginia, Marcus had never experienced such complete quiet. No bird songs, no insect buzzing, no rustling of small animals in the leaves. Even the sound of his ATV engine seemed muffled and wrong. After about a mile, the path opened into a large clearing, just as Elijah's map had indicated. But what Marcus saw there made him immediately understand why his great-grandfather had marked it as forbidden ground. The clearing was not empty. In the center stood a massive tree, easily 8 feet in diameter and taller than any tree Marcus had ever seen in West Virginia. Its bark was unnaturally dark, almost black, and its branches twisted upward in ways that seemed to defy natural growth patterns. But the tree was not what made Marcus's blood run cold. Scattered around the base of the tree were pieces of logging equipment. A chainsaw here, a hard hat there, work boots arranged in neat pairs. And hanging from the lower branches were dozens of items of clothing. Flannel shirts, work pants, leather gloves, all weather-beaten and faded but arranged with deliberate care. Marcus realized he was looking at a shrine of some kind, decorated with the belongings of loggers. As he sat on his idling ATV, trying to process what he was seeing, he noticed that some of the clothing looked familiar. His great-grandfather had described the uniforms his workers wore, and these matched the description perfectly. These were the belongings of Elijah's crew from 1947. As this realization hit him, Marcus became aware that the silence around him had changed. It was no longer just quiet. It felt expectant, like the entire forest was holding its breath and waiting for something to happen. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees in a matter of seconds, and Marcus could see his breath misting in the suddenly frigid air. That was when he heard the sound. It started as a low humming, barely audible over his ATV engine. But it grew steadily louder and more complex, until Marcus realized it was not humming at all. It was singing. Multiple voices, harmonizing in a language he did not recognize, coming from somewhere deep within the forest around the clearing. Marcus knew he needed to leave immediately. He revved his ATV and spun it around, heading back toward the path. But as he reached the edge of the clearing, the singing stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, he heard something that made him freeze with terror. Footsteps. Not the light steps of deer or the scurrying of small animals. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, moving through the forest on all sides of the clearing. From his position at the edge of the clearing, Marcus could see movement in the trees. Tall figures, moving between the trunks with fluid, unnatural grace. They were keeping to the shadows, but he could make out their basic shape. They walked upright like humans, but they were too tall, too thin. and they moved in a way that suggested their joints worked differently than human joints should. One of the figures stepped partially into the light at the far edge of the clearing. What Marcus saw there convinced him that his great-grandfather had been wise to abandon his logging operation. The thing was humanoid, but clearly not human. Its skin was bark-like and dark, its limbs unnaturally long and thin. Where its face should have been, there was something that looked more like the hollow of a tree trunk, dark and empty, but somehow aware. The creature raised one impossibly long arm and pointed directly at Marcus. At that gesture, the singing resumed. But now it was louder, more insistent, and it seemed to be coming from the creature itself. Other figures began to emerge from the forest, all of them tall and wrong and pointing in Marcus's direction. Marcus gunned his ATV and fled down the narrow path as fast as he dared. Behind him, the singing grew to a roar, and he could hear crashing sounds as the creatures moved through the forest, following him. Branches whipped at his face, and his ATV bounced violently over roots and rocks. But Marcus did not slow down. He could hear them behind him, moving through the trees parallel to the path, keeping pace with his machine despite the rough terrain. The pursuit continued until Marcus reached the main logging road. At that point, the sounds behind him stopped abruptly. When he finally dared to look back, he saw nothing but empty forest. But Marcus did not stop riding until he reached his truck, and he did not stop driving until he was back in town. That night, Marcus burned every one of his great-grandfather's maps. He never returned to the logging roads, and he has never spoken publicly about what he saw until now. But he did do some research into his family's history, and what he discovered confirmed his worst fears. In the local newspaper archives, Marcus found reports from 1947 about a series of disappearances among Elijah's logging crew. 7 men had vanished over the course of 2 months, all of them experienced woodsmen who knew the forest well. Search parties found no trace of them, and eventually the disappearances were attributed to the dangerous nature of logging work. But Marcus now understands what really happened to those men. Their belongings are still hanging from the branches of that ancient tree, trophies in a shrine maintained by things that do not want humans disturbing their territory. Marcus still lives in West Virginia, but he has never again ventured into the deep woods alone. And he has made sure that his own children know never to go looking for their family's abandoned logging operation. Some family secrets, he says, are meant to stay buried in the forest where they belong. This account comes from Isabella Rodriguez, a professional nature photographer who has spent the better part of her career documenting the wilderness areas of the southeastern United States. Isabella specializes in nocturnal wildlife photography, and her work has been featured in National Geographic and various conservation magazines. She is known for her meticulous planning and technical expertise, which makes what happened to her in the Tennessee mountains all the more disturbing. In September of 2021, Isabella received a commission from a prominent environmental magazine to photograph the old-growth forests of the Great Smoky Mountains for an article about conservation efforts. The assignment required her to document both the daytime beauty of these ancient forests and their nocturnal ecosystem. For Isabella, this was the kind of work she lived for. She had photographed in these mountains dozens of times before and considered herself intimately familiar with the terrain and wildlife patterns. Isabella planned a week-long expedition to capture images in some of the more remote areas of the park, places where human impact was minimal and the forest remained largely unchanged from its original state. She had obtained the necessary permits for backcountry photography and had planned her route carefully using topographical maps and GPS coordinates. Her equipment included 2 high-end digital cameras with infrared capabilities, multiple telephoto lenses, motion-activated trail cameras, and professional lighting equipment designed for wildlife photography. The first 3 days of the expedition went exactly as planned. Isabella captured stunning images of black bears, various bird species, and the intricate details of the forest ecosystem. Her nighttime photography sessions yielded particularly impressive results, with her infrared equipment revealing the hidden activities of nocturnal animals. By the 4th day, she had more than enough material for the magazine article. But she decided to venture deeper into the mountains to explore an area she had never photographed before. Using her GPS unit, Isabella hiked to a remote valley that was marked on her maps as containing some of the oldest trees in the entire mountain range. The area was accessible only by an unmarked trail that required several hours of difficult hiking through dense forest. When she finally reached the valley floor, Isabella was amazed by what she found. The trees here were massive, some easily over 400 years old, and they formed a canopy so thick that even in the middle of the day, the forest floor remained in deep twilight. Isabella set up her base camp in a small clearing near a stream and spent the remainder of the day scouting locations for her nighttime photography session. She noticed immediately that this part of the forest was unusually quiet. Even during the day, she heard very few bird calls or sounds of small animals moving through the undergrowth. The silence was so complete that it felt almost oppressive. But Isabella attributed this to the depth of the forest and the thickness of the canopy overhead. As evening approached, Isabella prepared her equipment for what she hoped would be the highlight of her expedition. She positioned her cameras at strategic locations throughout the valley, set up motion-activated trail cameras to capture any wildlife activity, and prepared her main camera with infrared filters for detailed nocturnal photography. The moon was nearly full that night, which would provide excellent natural lighting for her work. Around midnight, Isabella began her photography session in earnest. She was using a technique she had perfected over years of wildlife photography, moving silently through the forest and using her infrared-capable camera to capture images without disturbing the natural behavior of nocturnal animals. For the first hour, everything proceeded normally. She captured several excellent shots of owls, a family of raccoons, and various insects that were active in the darkness. But as she moved deeper into the valley, Isabella began to notice something strange about her camera's behavior. The digital display was flickering intermittently, and occasionally the camera would take pictures on its own, even when she was not pressing the shutter button. At first, she assumed this was a technical malfunction caused by the humidity or temperature changes in the deep forest. But when she reviewed the images on her camera's LCD screen, what she saw made her question her understanding of both her equipment and the forest around her. The camera had been taking pictures of areas where Isabella was certain no animals were present. But in these images, captured with infrared technology that could see heat signatures invisible to the human eye, there were figures, tall, humanoid shapes standing among the trees, sometimes just at the edge of the frame, sometimes directly in the center of the composition. The figures appeared to be generating no heat whatsoever. They showed up in the infrared images as completely black silhouettes, cold spots in an otherwise warm forest environment. Isabella initially convinced herself that these were technical glitches or artifacts caused by her equipment malfunctioning. But as she continued her photography session, the autonomous picture-taking became more frequent, and the figures in the images became more numerous and more clearly defined. In one particularly disturbing image, she counted 7 distinct figures arranged in a rough circle around a massive oak tree. In another, a tall figure appeared to be standing directly behind her previous position, as if it had been following her movements through the forest. The most unsettling aspect of these images was that the figures appeared to be aware of the camera. In several shots, they seemed to be looking directly at the lens, their dark forms oriented toward Isabella's position. And in the most recent images, They appeared to be moving closer, gradually closing the distance between themselves and her location. As Isabella reviewed these disturbing photographs, she became aware that the forest around her had changed. The already profound silence had deepened to an almost unnatural degree. No insects buzzed, no leaves rustled in the breeze, no night birds called. It was as if every living thing in the valley had suddenly ceased all activity. Even more disturbing, the temperature seemed to have dropped significantly. Isabella could see her breath in the frigid air, despite the fact that it had been a warm September evening when she began her photography session. Isabella decided to return to her base camp immediately. But as she began to pack her equipment, her camera started taking pictures again, this time in rapid succession. The shutter fired continuously for nearly 30 seconds, capturing dozens of images before finally stopping. When Isabella reviewed these new photographs, what she saw convinced her that she needed to leave the valley immediately. The images showed the same dark figures, but now they were much closer and much more numerous. In the final photograph of the sequence, one of the figures appeared to be standing less than 10 feet from her position. The figure was extraordinarily tall, at least 8 feet in height, and impossibly thin. Where its face should have been, there was only a dark void that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Isabella gathered her equipment as quickly as possible and began hiking back toward the main trail, using her flashlight to navigate through the dark forest. But as she moved through the trees, her camera continued to malfunction, taking random pictures and displaying error messages she had never seen before. Against her better judgment, Isabella continued to check these new images, and what she saw terrified her beyond rational thought. The photographs now showed multiple figures moving through the forest around her. They appeared to be keeping pace with her movements, staying just outside the range of her flashlight, but clearly visible in the infrared spectrum of her camera. In some images, they seemed to be moving through the trees themselves, their dark forms passing through solid wood, as if it were empty air. In others, they appeared to be moving along the ground in ways that defied normal locomotion, flowing rather than walking. Most disturbing of all, the figures seemed to be communicating with each other. In several consecutive images, Isabella could see them positioned at various points around her location, their forms oriented toward each other as if they were coordinating some kind of action. And in the most recent photographs, they had begun to close in, forming an ever-tightening circle around her path through the forest. Isabella abandoned any attempt at stealth and began running through the forest as fast as she dared in the darkness. Behind her, she could hear sounds that did not match any known wildlife. Not footsteps, but a sound like wind moving through branches. Except there was no wind. The sound seemed to be coming from multiple directions simultaneously, and it was following her movements through the forest. As Isabella ran, her camera continued its autonomous photography, and the images became increasingly disturbing. The figures were now clearly pursuing her, moving through the forest with impossible speed and grace. In one image, a figure appeared to be suspended in midair between two trees. In another, multiple figures seemed to be emerging from the ground itself, their dark forms rising from the forest floor like shadows given substance. Isabella finally reached the main trail and did not stop running until she reached her vehicle. Only when she was safely inside with the doors locked did she dare to review the final images her camera had captured. The last photograph showed the edge of the forest where the trail began. Standing just inside the tree line, barely visible in the infrared spectrum, were dozens of the dark figures. They appeared to be watching her, but they had not followed her beyond the boundary of the deep forest. Isabella drove directly home and has never returned to that remote valley. She submitted her assignment to the magazine using only the photographs from her first 3 days in the mountains. She has never shown the disturbing images from her final night to anyone. and she has never spoken publicly about what her camera captured in that ancient forest. But Isabella did conduct extensive research into the history of the area where she had her encounter. What she discovered was that the remote valley had a long history of unexplained disappearances and strange sightings dating back to the earliest European settlements in the region. Local Cherokee traditions spoke of that particular valley as a place where the boundary between the physical world and the spirit world was thin. A place where ancient guardians still protected the oldest parts of the forest from human intrusion. Isabella no longer does solo photography expeditions in remote wilderness areas. When asked why, she simply says that some places are not meant to be documented, and some subjects are better left unphotographed. This account comes from the personnel files of the North Carolina State Park Service and was shared with us by retired park supervisor William Hayes, who worked alongside Ranger Dakota Williams for over 8 years before the incident that ended Dakota's career and changed the lives of everyone who knew her. What we are about to share with you are the actual radio transcripts from Dakota's final patrol, along with testimony from the search and rescue teams who went looking for her when she failed to return. Dakota Williams had been a park ranger at Grandfather Mountain State Park for nearly a decade. She was known among her colleagues as one of the most competent and reliable rangers in the entire North Carolina system. Dakota was an experienced wilderness tracker, a certified emergency medical technician, and had completed advanced training in search and rescue operations. She was the kind of ranger who was sent on the most difficult assignments because her supervisors knew she could handle any situation the mountains might present. In October of 2020, the Park Service received reports from several hikers about unusual sounds coming from the remote northwestern section of the park, an area known as Dead Man's Hollow. The reports described screaming sounds that did not match any known wildlife, as well as sightings of large shapes moving through the forest at night. Park management initially dismissed these reports as typical misidentifications of common animals. But when similar reports continued to come in over a period of several weeks, they decided to send a ranger to investigate. Dakota volunteered for the assignment. She was familiar with Dead Man's Hollow, having patrolled the area many times over the years, and she was confident that she could quickly determine the source of the disturbances and put the hikers' concerns to rest. The plan was simple. Dakota would hike into the hollow on a Friday afternoon, establish a base camp, and spend the weekend conducting systematic patrols to identify any unusual animal activity or signs of human interference in the area. Dakota's radio was equipped with a digital recording system that automatically logged all transmissions for training and safety purposes. This recording system would later provide the only evidence of what happened to her during those 3 days in Dead Man's Hollow. What follows are the exact transcripts of her radio communications, along with timestamps and notes from Park Dispatch. Friday, October 16th, 2024, 32 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, this is Ranger Williams. I'm approaching the trailhead for Dead Man's Hollow. Weather conditions are clear, temperature is approximately 65 degrees. I'm carrying full camping gear for a 3-day patrol. Estimated arrival at base camp location is 1600 hours. 1615 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, Williams here. I've established base camp at grid coordinates 36.1197 north, 81.8754 west. The hollow is quieter than usual. No bird activity, very little insect noise. Could be seasonal, but it's unusual for this time of year. Beginning initial patrol of the area now. 1945 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, this is Williams. Completed first patrol sweep of the hollow. No signs of unusual animal activity, no evidence of human interference. Found several deer tracks and scat, but nothing out of the ordinary. I did notice that the wildlife seems to be avoiding the deeper parts of the hollow. All tracks I found were along the edges, near the main trail. We'll investigate further tomorrow. Saturday, October 17th, 2020, 7:30 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, Williams checking in. Had a quiet night, though I did hear some sounds around 3 a.m. that I could not identify. Sounded like vocalizations, but not from any animal I recognize. Could have been wind through the rock formations. Beginning extended patrol of the hollow's interior sections. 11:22 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, this is Williams. I'm about 2 miles into the hollow, following the creek bed. I've found something unusual. There's a circle of trees here, all the same species, arranged in what appears to be a perfect ring. The trees are old growth, probably 200 years or more, but they're arranged too precisely to be natural. The ground inside the circle is completely bare. No vegetation, no leaf litter, nothing. Soil appears to have been disturbed recently, but I can't determine by what. 14:17 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, Williams here. I've been investigating the tree circle for the past few hours. Found several items buried in the soil, old camping equipment, pieces of clothing, what looks like personal belongings. Some of it appears to be decades old, but some looks recent. I'm going to collect samples and continue my investigation. The area has an unusual feel to it. Hard to explain. We'll report more detailed findings this evening. 21:33 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, this is Williams. Something is not right here. I returned to my base camp about an hour ago and found that my equipment had been moved. Food containers were opened and emptied, but not by animals. Too neat, too deliberate. Tent was repositioned, but not damaged. Someone or something went through my camp while I was away. I'm going to maintain radio contact throughout the night and will request backup if necessary. Sunday, October 18th, 2020 02, 17 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, Williams here. I need backup immediately. There are sounds surrounding my position. Not animal sounds. Sounds like voices, but distorted. Multiple voices, coming from different directions. They seem to be communicating with each other. I can see movement in the trees around my camp. Large shapes, too big to be deer or bear. Request immediate assistance. 2:23 hours. Base to Ranger Williams. Williams, this is base. We're dispatching a team to your location. Estimated arrival time is 5 a.m. hours. Maintain your position and stay on the radio. Can you describe what you're seeing? 2:25 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, the shapes are getting closer. They're moving through the trees, but not like animals. They seem to be flowing. That's the only way I can describe it. And the voices are getting louder. They're not speaking any language I recognize, but it sounds like they're negotiating something, discussing something. 2:31 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, they're at the edge of my camp now. I can see them clearly. They're tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, but thin, too thin. Their limbs are wrong, too long, joints in the wrong places. They're surrounding my position, but they haven't approached directly. It's like they're waiting for something. 2:35 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, one of them is approaching my tent. It's making gestures with its arms, pointing toward the tree circle I found earlier. I think they want me to go there. The voices have stopped. They're all just standing there, waiting, watching me. 02:41 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, I'm going to try to move toward the main trail. They're not blocking that direction. Maybe I can reach the backup team before... Wait, the one nearest to me just moved. It's positioning itself between me and the trail exit. they don't want me to leave. 2:47 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, they're communicating again. The sounds are coming from them directly now, not from the forest. It's like they're singing, but in harmonies that don't make sense. Too many voices for the number of figures I can see. And base, the temperature just dropped dramatically. I can see my breath. It was 60 degrees when I made camp. 2:52 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, they're moving again. All of them at the same time, in the same direction. Toward the tree circle. They're gesturing for me to follow them. I don't think I have a choice here. They're not threatening me directly. But they're making it clear that I need to go with them. 3:03 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, I'm following them to the tree circle. I don't know what else to do. The backup team needs to know that this is not a normal search and rescue situation. These are not animals, and they're not human. They seem to have intelligence, purpose. They're leading me somewhere specific. 3:15 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, we've reached the tree circle. They've arranged themselves around the perimeter, all facing inward. There's something in the center now, something that wasn't there before. It looks like an opening in the ground. Not a cave, not a hole. An opening. The edges are too smooth, too perfect. They're indicating that I should approach it. 3:21 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, I can see down into the opening now. There's light coming from below, but not electric light. Something else. And I can hear sounds from down there. Voices, but human voices this time. People talking, but I can't make out the words. Base, I think there are people down there. People who have been missing. 3:24 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, they want me to go down there. Into the opening. I can see what looks like steps carved into the sides, leading down. The voices from below are getting louder. Someone down there is calling for help. I have to go help them. That's my job. 3:27 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, I'm going down. If you don't hear from me again, tell my family that I was doing my job. Tell them that I found something in Dead Man's Hollow that explains all the missing hikers over the years. Tell them that Transmission ends. The backup team reached Dakota's campsite at 05:15 hours on Sunday morning. They found her equipment scattered around the campsite, but no sign of Dakota herself. A thorough search of Dead Man's Hollow revealed no trace of the tree circle Dakota had described, no opening in the ground, and no explanation for her disappearance. The official Park Service report concluded that Ranger Dakota Williams had suffered some kind of psychological break during her solo patrol and had wandered off into the wilderness in a confused state. The strange radio transmissions were attributed to stress-induced hallucinations. But the search teams found one piece of evidence that was not included in the official report. Dakota's radio, discovered nearly a mile from her campsite, had continued recording for several hours after her final transmission. The additional recordings contained only silence, except for one brief moment at 06:33 hours. For exactly 30 seconds, the radio picked up what sounded like Dakota's voice, calling for help from somewhere deep underground. Dakota Williams was never found. The northwestern section of Grandfather Mountain State Park was quietly closed to public access, and no park rangers have been assigned to patrol Dead Man's Hollow since October of 2020. This story comes from Ethan Kowalski, an experienced mushroom forager and wilderness enthusiast from Pennsylvania. He shared an account of his unsettling experience while hunting for rare mushrooms in the remote Appalachian forests near the border of Pennsylvania and West Virginia. Ethan, respected in the local mycology community for his knowledge and caution, assures us the events he describes are real and remain a mystery to this day. Ethan had been searching for mushrooms since his teenage years. Over the last decade, his expertise had grown considerably, especially when it came to the elusive and fragrant morel mushrooms that flourished in the spring and early summer months across the Appalachian region. The forests surrounding the border of Pennsylvania and West Virginia were known among foragers for their rich variety of fungi. Ethan had explored many areas, but there was one patch of particularly dense forest near a small river valley where he had heard stories of extraordinary finds and unexplained disappearances. In June of 2022, Ethan set out early in the morning, eager to explore this specific valley, which was locally known as Black River Hollow. Ethan had never been inside Black River Hollow before, but had always been curious due to local warnings about the area. For years, he had heard rumors about people entering the valley in search of mushrooms and never being seen again. Still, his passion for fungi and his respect for nature drove him to explore this enigmatic forest. Ethan told us he was cautious throughout his journey, bringing along standard safety gear, a GPS unit, first aid supplies, and a reliable cell phone with satellite communication capabilities. He followed a narrow trail that wound through the trees and eventually diverged toward the river valley. The sounds of flowing water were faint but constant up ahead. After a 2-hour hike, he reached the bottom of the valley where the forest seemed to thicken and the canopy grew darker. The air was damp and heavy, with the earthy smell of moss, rotting wood, and growing mushrooms. It was here that Ethan began his search, carefully inspecting the forest floor for the distinctive appearance of morel mushrooms and other edible varieties. What caught Ethan's attention almost immediately was the presence of an unusually perfect circle of fairy ring mushrooms. Fairy rings are a natural phenomenon caused by certain types of fungi that grow in circular patterns due to their underground network of mycelium expanding outward uniformly. But the circle Ethan encountered was unlike any he had ever seen. The mushrooms were unusually large and glowing faintly with a pale blue light. Intrigued and slightly unnerved, Ethan circled around the fairy ring, noting that the center of the circle was disturbingly bare of vegetation, as if the fungal activity had sterilized the soil. Curious about the origins, he decided to step inside the ring, hoping to find some clues. No sooner had he stepped into the circle than Ethan felt a sudden chill sweep through the valley. The usual sounds of the forest, bird calls, rustling leaves, insect buzz, seemed to pause. The mood shifted from peaceful to tense, and Ethan immediately became aware of a subtle but unmistakable presence watching him. Ethan tried to dismiss the feeling as paranoia, focusing instead on the task of collecting mushroom specimens. He took extensive notes and photos to document the fairy ring and the other fungi around it. But as he moved further into the circle, he noticed something strange. The trees seemed to lean inward, bending slightly toward the fairy ring, and the shadows beneath the canopy deepened unnaturally. As he ventured deeper, Ethan spotted something on the ground ahead. At first, he thought it was a shadow, but as he approached, he realized it was a cluster of worn leather shoes arranged neatly in a circle, an eerie echo of the fungal ring above. Around the shoes were bones, animal bones at least, but some looked strangely gnawed on, as if by creatures that were neither ordinary forest scavengers nor humans. The uneasiness grew stronger, and Ethan decided to take a moment to rest. As he sat on a nearby fallen log, he reflected on the local stories he had heard growing up. Stories of forest spirits guarding the more sacred parts of the wilderness, punishing those who disturbed their domain. Many forbade entering the heart of Black River Hollow, warning that the forest would consume those who ignored the warnings. Suddenly, Ethan felt a sharp movement nearby. He looked up just in time to see a dark shape darting between the trees. It was tall and slender, moving with an unnatural grace, and it appeared to be watching him. Ethan raised his camera, hoping to capture the figure, but as he adjusted his lens, the creature vanished without a trace. Unsettled but driven by a mix of curiosity and caution, Ethan packed up his specimens and began to exit the valley. However, as he followed the path back toward the trailhead, he realized the forest seemed to have changed. The landmarks he had noted on the way in appeared slightly different. The angle of a tree, the position of a rock, making him question whether he was truly retracing his steps. His GPS signal flickered and temporarily went out. The device rebooted, but showed him far off course. Ethan struggled to maintain his nerves, knowing that panicking would only make it harder to find his way home. Just when he feared he would become lost in the valley, a faint glowing light appeared ahead, softly illuminating the forest floor. It was the same pale blue light as the mushrooms in the fairy ring, and it seemed to be beckoning him forward. Drawn by the light, Ethan approached an ancient tree at the edge of the valley. The tree was covered in the same glowing mushrooms, arranged in a pattern almost like a symbol. At the base of the tree, he saw a small, hand-carved wooden box partially buried in the soil. Ethan opened the box carefully and found inside several old artifacts: a rusted pocket watch, a cracked leather-bound journal, and a collection of faded photographs. The journal belonged to a man named Jonathan Weaver, a mushroom hunter who had reportedly disappeared in Black River Hollow decades earlier. The photographs depicted Weaver and his family posing near the same valley where Ethan now stood. Reading the journal entries, Ethan discovered that Weaver had documented strange occurrences similar to his own experience. The eerie fairy rings, the unnatural silence, the appearance of shadowy figures moving through the forest. Weaver's final entry ended abruptly, mentioning a desire to protect the sacred forest, followed by a warning to all who might follow. Do not cross the circle. Do not disturb what guards these woods. As Ethan closed the journal, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, and the glowing mushrooms flickered before going dark. The forest around him seemed to exhale, releasing its tension, and the usual sounds of the woods gradually returned. Following the fading blue light back to the main trail, Ethan managed to find his way out of Black River Hollow before darkness fell. He made his way back to the trailhead and reported his findings to his local mycology club and the forest ranger station. Though some were skeptical, many acknowledged the historical disappearances and strange folklore associated with Black River Hollow. But Ethan's experience did not end when he left the forest. Over the following weeks, he noticed something disturbing about the mushroom specimens he had collected from inside the fairy ring. Despite being stored in proper conditions, they continued to glow with that same pale blue light, growing brighter each night. The glow was so intense that Ethan had to store them in a sealed container in his basement to prevent the eerie light from disturbing his sleep. Even more unsettling, Ethan began to experience vivid dreams about Black River Hollow. In these dreams, he would find himself back in the forest, standing inside the fairy ring, while shadowy figures moved through the trees around him. The figures never approached directly, but they seemed to be waiting for something, watching him with an intelligence that felt ancient and patient. After 3 weeks of these disturbing dreams and the continuously glowing specimens, Ethan made a decision. He returned to Black River Hollow, carrying the collected mushrooms in a sealed container. When he reached the location where he had found the fairy ring, he was not surprised to discover that the circle was still there, still glowing with that unnatural blue light. Ethan carefully placed the specimens back where he had found them, arranging them according to the pattern he remembered. As soon as the last mushroom was returned to its original position, the glowing intensified briefly, then faded to the same level he had first observed. The oppressive Feeling that had haunted him for weeks immediately lifted, and the forest around him seemed to return to its natural state. The dream stopped that night, and Ethan never experienced any further supernatural occurrences related to his time in Black River Hollow. But the experience left him with a profound respect for the boundaries that exist in the deep wilderness. Boundaries that are not marked by signs or fences, but by forces far older and more powerful than human understanding. To this day, Ethan Kowalski advises caution to anyone interested in exploring the deeper valleys of the Appalachian forests. He warns that some areas are protected not by government decree, but by forces and guardians unknown to most, and that disturbing their domain comes at a cost that few can survive. He has never returned to Black River Hollow, and he never will. The legend of the glowing fairy rings and the mysterious guardian watching over Black River Hollow remains part of local folklore. But Ethan's detailed account serves as a chilling reminder that some parts of the forest still hold secrets far beyond the understanding of even the most experienced mushroom hunters. Some territories, he learned, belong to entities that have been protecting them far longer than humans have walked these mountains, and they do not appreciate intrusions from the outside world. This story comes from Zoe Baptiste, a seasoned search and rescue volunteer based in Virginia who has dedicated over a decade of her life to helping locate missing persons in the Appalachian wilderness. What she experienced during one particular case in 2023 challenged everything she thought she knew about the forests she had spent years navigating. And it remains the most disturbing search mission of her entire career. Zoe had been volunteering with the Virginia Search and Rescue Team for nearly 10 years, specializing in wilderness recovery missions and lost person searches. Her experience included everything from finding disoriented day hikers to recovering bodies in treacherous terrain. She was known among her colleagues for her methodical approach, her ability to remain calm under pressure, and her impressive success rate in locating missing persons. In late October of 2023, Zoe received an urgent call about a group of 5 experienced hikers who had failed to return from a multi-day trek in a remote area of the Blue Ridge Mountains known as Blackwood Ridge. The group consisted of seasoned outdoors enthusiasts, all with extensive Appalachian hiking experience and proper equipment for extended backcountry expeditions. They had been overdue for 3 days when the search was initiated. The missing hikers were led by David Chen, a wilderness survival instructor and experienced guide who had been exploring Appalachian trails for over 15 years. The other members of the group were Sarah Mitchell, a geology professor from Virginia Tech, Marcus Thompson, an outdoor photographer, Jennifer Walsh, a park ranger from Shenandoah National Park, and Robert Kim, a medical student who regularly participated in wilderness first aid training. This was not a group of inexperienced weekend warriors. These were people who understood the risks of backcountry hiking and knew how to handle emergency situations. The last communication from the group had come 4 days earlier, when David Chen sent a brief message via satellite communicator to his emergency contact. The message was unusually cryptic for someone as methodical as Chen. It simply read, "Route changed. Found something unexpected. Cave system not on maps. Will update tomorrow." No further communications were received. When the search and rescue team assembled at the staging area near Blackwood Ridge, Zoe was assigned to lead one of 3 teams tasked with covering different sections of the suspected search area. Based on the hikers' original itinerary and the location of Chen's final satellite transmission, the search teams focused on a particularly remote section of the ridge that was rarely visited by casual hikers. Blackwood Ridge was notorious among local search and rescue personnel for its difficult terrain, dense forest coverage, and extensive cave systems that were not fully mapped or documented. The area had a history of missing person cases dating back decades, and local folklore spoke of the ridge as a place where people simply vanished without explanation. But Zoe had always attributed such stories to the natural dangers of the wilderness rather than any supernatural causes. On the second day of the search, Zoe's team discovered the first evidence of the missing hikers near an abandoned trailhead that was not part of their original planned route. Scattered around the area were several pieces of equipment that clearly belonged to the missing group. A distinctive blue backpack that matched David Chen's gear, a water bottle with Sarah Mitchell's university sticker, and a pair of expensive hiking boots that fit the description of equipment carried by Marcus Thompson. The discovery of these abandoned items was troubling for several reasons. The equipment had been left in an organized manner, not scattered as if dropped during a panic or emergency. The items were also undamaged and showed no signs of animal interference, despite being exposed to the elements for several days. Most disturbing of all, the equipment included essential survival gear that no experienced hiker would willingly abandon, including water purification tablets, emergency shelter materials, and first aid supplies. Among the abandoned items, Zoe's team found something that would prove crucial to understanding what had happened to the missing hikers. Tucked inside David Chen's backpack was a small waterproof notebook that he used to document his hiking experiences. The final entries in this journal provided the first clues about the group's fate and the discovery that had apparently led them away from their planned route. According to Chen's journal entries, the group had been following their intended trail when Sarah Mitchell, the geologist, noticed unusual rock formations that suggested the presence of a cave system in an area where no caves were documented on any official maps. Intrigued by the geological anomaly and Chen's natural curiosity about unexplored wilderness areas, the group decided to investigate. The journal described the discovery of a cave entrance that was partially concealed by fallen trees and thick vegetation, almost as if nature itself was trying to hide the opening. Chen noted that the cave mouth was larger than typical limestone formations in the area, and that strange symbols or markings were visible on the rock face near the entrance. He described these symbols as looking ancient and deliberately carved, but not matching any known Native American petroglyphs. What made Chen's journal entries particularly unsettling was his description of the group's emotional response to the cave discovery. He wrote that all 5 members of the group felt an immediate and inexplicable sense of unease when they approached the cave entrance. Despite their extensive wilderness experience, every member of the group reported feeling watched and experiencing an overwhelming urge to leave the area immediately. However, Chen's final journal entry indicated that the group had decided to explore the cave despite their reservations. He wrote, "We all feel something is wrong here, but we can't explain what. Sarah thinks the geological formations inside might be significant. We're going to do a preliminary exploration and then continue on our planned route tomorrow. If anything happens to us, we entered the cave at coordinates 38.2456 north, 78.8834 west." Using these coordinates, Zoe's team was able to locate the cave that Chen had described. The entrance was indeed partially hidden by vegetation and fallen trees, and it would have been easy to miss if they had not been specifically searching for it. As they approached the cave mouth, Zoe experienced the same sense of unease that Chen had described in his journal. Every member of her search team reported feeling uncomfortable and on edge, despite their professional training and experience with cave searches. The cave entrance was larger than typical formations in the area, and the rock face did indeed bear strange markings that appeared to be deliberately carved. The symbols were unlike anything Zoe had seen before, consisting of intersecting lines and circular patterns that seemed to follow some kind of systematic design. But there was no time to analyze the symbols in detail. The priority was locating the missing hikers. Equipped with professional cave rescue gear, headlamps, safety ropes, and emergency communications equipment, Zoe's team entered the cave system. The interior was immediately different from other caves in the region. The passages were wider and more uniform than natural limestone formations typically produced, and the air was noticeably colder than the mild October weather outside. As they moved deeper into the cave, the team found clear evidence that the missing hikers had been there recently. Footprints in the cave floor matched the boot patterns of the missing group, and they discovered several more pieces of equipment, including flashlights, a camping stove, and additional clothing items. But these items were arranged in a way that seemed deliberate rather than accidentally dropped. In one chamber, approximately 200 feet from the cave entrance, Zoe's team made a discovery that convinced them they were on the right track, but also deepened the mystery of what had happened to the hikers. Personal effects belonging to each of the 5 missing hikers had been carefully arranged in a circle in the center of the chamber. David Chen's satellite communicator, Sarah Mitchell's geological sampling tools, Marcus Thompson's camera equipment, Jennifer Walsh's park ranger badge, and Robert Kim's medical supplies were all present and accounted for. But the arrangement of these items was what made the discovery so unsettling. They had not been carelessly dropped or scattered as might be expected if the hikers had encountered an emergency. Instead, they were positioned with obvious deliberation, as if they had been placed there as part of some kind of ritual or offering. And despite the fact that the items included valuable and essential equipment, there was no sign of the hikers themselves. As Zoe's team investigated the chamber, they began to notice other disturbing aspects of the cave environment. Strange sounds echoed through the passages, sounds that could not be explained by normal cave acoustics or the presence of bats or other cave-dwelling animals. They heard what sounded like whispers in the distance, footsteps that seemed to move parallel to their own movements, and occasional thuds or impacts that reverberated through the rock walls. The cave system itself seemed to defy logical exploration. Passages that appeared to lead deeper into the mountain would suddenly end in solid walls, while other tunnels seemed to loop back on themselves in ways that violated basic principles of cave formation. Zoe's team used standard cave mapping techniques to keep track of their progress, but their compass readings were inconsistent, and their GPS units provided contradictory location data. Most disturbing of all was the growing sense that they were being watched by something in the cave. Multiple team members reported seeing movement in their peripheral vision, shadowy figures that would disappear when observed directly. At one point, Zoe herself saw what appeared to be a tall, humanoid figure standing in a passage ahead of them. But when she directed her headlamp toward the location, nothing was there. After 6 hours of searching the cave system, Zoe's team had covered what they estimated to be over a mile of passages and chambers, but they had found no trace of the missing hikers beyond their abandoned personal effects. The cave seemed to extend much farther into the mountain than geological surveys had indicated, and several passages led to areas that were not accessible without specialized climbing equipment. As the team prepared to exit the cave and call for additional resources, they experienced what Zoe later described as the most terrifying moment of her search and rescue career. As they moved back toward the cave entrance, following the route they had mapped on their way in, they discovered that passages they had previously explored were no longer there. Tunnels that had been clearly marked on their cave map seemed to have vanished, replaced by solid rock walls. The team found themselves disoriented and temporarily lost in a cave system that should have been familiar to them. Their carefully maintained route markers had disappeared, and their compass readings were now completely unreliable. For nearly 2 hours, they searched for the exit, growing increasingly concerned that they might become trapped in the same mysterious circumstances that had apparently claimed the missing hikers. Eventually, the team managed to locate the cave entrance by following air currents and the faint sound of wind moving through the passage. But as they emerged from the cave, they realized that several hours had passed beyond what their exploration should have required. According to their watches, they had been in the cave for over 10 hours, but their detailed logs accounted for only 6 hours of actual search time. The search for the missing hikers continued for another 5 days, with additional teams exploring different sections of Blackwood Ridge and specialized cave rescue units investigating every accessible cave system in the area. But no further trace of David Chen, Sarah Mitchell, Marcus Thompson, Jennifer Walsh, or Robert Kim was ever found. The search was eventually suspended when it became clear that the resources being expended were not producing results. The official search and rescue report concluded that the 5 hikers had likely become lost in the unmapped cave system and had succumbed to exposure or injury in passages that were too dangerous or inaccessible for rescue teams to reach. The abandoned personal effects were attributed to the hikers' attempts to lighten their loads during an emergency evacuation of the cave. But Zoe knew that the official explanation did not account for many of the disturbing details of the case. The deliberate arrangement of the personal effects, the impossible cave geography, the time discrepancies, and the overwhelming sense of being watched by something intelligent and malevolent were not mentioned in the official report. In the months following the search, Zoe conducted her own research into the history of Blackwood Ridge and discovered that the missing hikers case was not an isolated incident. Records dating back to the early 1800s documented similar disappearances in the same area, always involving small groups of people who had discovered cave systems that were not shown on any maps. Local Cherokee oral traditions spoke of the ridge as a place where the boundary between the physical world and the spirit world was thin, a place where ancient guardians still protected sacred sites from intrusion. Zoe has never returned to Blackwood Ridge, and she advises other search and rescue personnel to exercise extreme caution when conducting operations in the area. She believes that some places in the deep wilderness are protected by forces that operate beyond human understanding, and that certain discoveries are meant to remain hidden. The case of the 5 missing hikers remains officially unsolved, but Zoe's detailed account provides a chilling reminder that the Appalachian wilderness still holds secrets that can claim the lives of even the most experienced and prepared outdoors enthusiasts. The cave where David Chen and his companions made their final exploration has never been relocated, despite multiple attempts by both official search teams and independent investigators. This story comes from Tyler Nakamura, an experienced mountaineer from Kentucky who has spent over a decade challenging himself on some of the most difficult rock faces in the southeastern United States. Tyler's account describes an incident that occurred during what should have been a routine technical climb in the summer of 2023, but which became something far more terrifying than any physical challenge he had ever faced. Tyler had been climbing since he was 16 years old, starting with local crags near his hometown of Lexington, before gradually working his way up to more challenging routes throughout the Appalachian region. By 2023, he was considered an expert climber with extensive experience in technical rock climbing, mountaineering, and rescue techniques. He was known in the climbing community for his meticulous preparation, his respect for safety protocols, and his deep appreciation for the natural environment of the mountains. In late July of 2023, Tyler planned an ambitious climbing expedition to a remote area of the Cumberland Plateau, known for its challenging and largely unexplored rock formations. His target was a technical route on a cliff face that locals called Devil's Backbone, a name that Tyler had always assumed referred to the jagged appearance of the rock formation when viewed from a distance. Tyler's climbing partner for this expedition was Michael Alvarez, a trusted friend and fellow climber who had accompanied Tyler on dozens of previous adventures. Michael was equally experienced and shared Tyler's commitment to safety and environmental stewardship. Together, they had successfully completed some of the most challenging climbs in Kentucky, West Virginia, and North Carolina. The planning for the Devil's Backbone climb had taken several months. Tyler and Michael studied topographical maps, reviewed weather patterns, and consulted with local climbing guides to understand the unique challenges presented by this particular route. The cliff face was known for its technical difficulty, featuring overhangs, narrow ledges, and rock that required specialized protection techniques. On the morning of July 28, 2023, Tyler and Michael began their approach to the base of Devil's Backbone under ideal conditions. The weather was clear and warm, with light winds and excellent visibility. They carried comprehensive climbing gear, including dynamic ropes, a full rack of protection devices, harnesses, helmets, and emergency equipment. Their plan was to complete the climb in a single day, but they also carried bivouac gear in case weather or other circumstances required an overnight stay on the mountain. The initial stages of the climb proceeded exactly as Tyler and Michael had anticipated. The rock was solid and provided good holds, and their protection placements were secure and reliable. Both climbers felt confident and comfortable as they worked their way up the lower sections of the route, following a line of weakness in the rock that would eventually lead them to the summit ridge. Around midday, Tyler and Michael reached a challenging section of the climb that required them to navigate a significant overhang. Tyler was leading this pitch, carefully placing protection devices and testing each hold before committing his full weight. It was while he was securing a particularly critical anchor point that the first signs of trouble began to manifest. Michael, who was belaying Tyler from a ledge about 40 feet below, suddenly felt a strange vibration running through the rock face. The sensation was subtle at first, almost like the distant rumble of heavy machinery, but it quickly intensified into a rhythmic pulsing that seemed to emanate from deep within the mountain itself. Michael called up to Tyler to ask if he was experiencing the same phenomenon, and Tyler confirmed that he could feel the vibrations as well. Initially, both climbers assumed that the vibrations were caused by some kind of geological activity, perhaps minor seismic tremors or the settling of rock formations. Such phenomena were not uncommon in mountainous regions, and neither Tyler nor Michael was immediately concerned. But as the vibrations continued to intensify, they were accompanied by a low humming sound that seemed to resonate through the entire cliff face. Tyler described the sound as unlike anything he had ever heard in the mountains. It was not the wind moving through rock formations, nor was it the sound of water flowing through underground passages. Instead, it was a deliberate, almost musical tone that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the vibrations they could feel through the rock. The sound gradually grew louder and more complex, until it resembled a chorus of voices harmonizing in frequencies that were almost below the range of human hearing. As Tyler worked to complete his anchor placement and continue up the overhang, he noticed that his climbing equipment was beginning to behave in ways that defied explanation. His rope, which had been inspected that morning and was in perfect condition, began to develop frays and tangles even though it was not in contact with any sharp edges. The carabiners that connected his protection devices to the rope began to open spontaneously, despite being properly locked. Most alarming of all, the webbing on his harness started to loosen, as if the buckles were adjusting themselves. Tyler immediately signaled to Michael that they needed to abort the climb and begin their descent. But when Michael attempted to set up a rappel anchor, he discovered that his equipment was experiencing the same inexplicable malfunctions. Carabiners would not stay locked. Protection devices pulled out of solid rock placements, and their ropes became tangled in knots that neither climber had tied. As Tyler and Michael struggled to understand what was happening to their equipment, Tyler noticed movement on the summit ridge above them. At first, he thought he was seeing birds or other wildlife. But as he focused his attention on the area, he realized that the moving shapes were far too large to be animals. and were moving in ways that no natural creature could achieve. The figures on the ridge appeared to be humanoid in shape, but were composed of what looked like living shadow. They moved with fluid, impossible grace, gliding across the rocky terrain without appearing to make contact with the ground. Tyler counted at least 6 distinct figures, all of them seeming to move in coordination with each other, as if they were participants in some kind of choreographed dance. What made the sight even more disturbing was Tyler's growing conviction that these shadow figures were aware of his and Michael's presence and were actively observing them. The figures would pause in their movements and orient themselves toward the climber's position, remaining motionless for long periods as if studying the 2 humans clinging to the rock face below them. Michael, who had been focused on trying to repair their malfunctioning equipment, looked up when Tyler called his attention to the figures on the ridge. Michael's reaction confirmed that Tyler was not experiencing hallucinations or altitude-induced confusion. The shadow figures were visible to both climbers, and their presence filled both men with an overwhelming sense of dread and vulnerability. With their climbing equipment compromised and no safe way to continue either up or down the cliff face, Tyler and Michael found themselves trapped on a narrow ledge approximately 300 feet above the ground and 150 feet below the summit. The ledge was barely wide enough for both men to sit side by side, and there was no natural shelter from the elements. As afternoon turned to evening, the shadow figures on the ridge became more active and appeared to move closer to the edge of the cliff. Tyler and Michael could see them more clearly now, and what they observed convinced them that these entities were not natural phenomena. The figures appeared to be deliberately elongated, with limbs that were too long for their bodies and movements that suggested their joints functioned differently from human anatomy. Tyler described the figures as appearing to be both ancient and timeless, as if they had been part of the mountain landscape for far longer than human civilization had existed in the region. They moved with the confidence of beings that belonged in this environment and viewed the human climbers as intruders in their domain. As darkness fell, Tyler and Michael were forced to spend the night on the exposed ledge, sharing their emergency bivouac gear and trying to stay warm in the rapidly dropping temperatures. The July night, which should have been mild even at their elevation, became brutally cold, with frost forming on the rock and their breath visible in the frigid air. Throughout the night, the presence of the shadow figures became even more pronounced. Tyler and Michael could hear sounds from the ridge above that clearly came from intelligent entities rather than natural phenomena. They heard what sounded like voices speaking in languages neither man recognized, rhythmic chanting that seemed to echo the humming they had heard earlier, and occasionally sounds that resembled laughter. The most terrifying aspect of the night was the growing realization that the shadow figures were not simply observing the trapped climbers, but were actively preventing their escape. Every attempt Tyler and Michael made to repair their equipment or find an alternative route off the ledge was met with increased activity from the entities above, as if they were being warned away from any action that might lead to their departure from the mountain. At one point during the night, Tyler noticed an eerie blue-green glow emanating from a crevice in the rock face near their position. The light pulsed in rhythm with the sounds they were hearing from above, and it seemed to be responding to the movements of the shadow figures. When Michael directed his flashlight toward the source of the glow, the beam was absorbed completely, creating an area of darkness that was somehow deeper and more absolute than the natural darkness of the night. As dawn approached, the activity from the shadow figures gradually decreased, and the unnatural cold that had plagued Tyler and Michael throughout the night began to ease. The frost that had formed on their equipment and clothing melted away as normal mountain temperatures returned. Most importantly, when Tyler tested his climbing gear, he found that it was functioning properly again, as if the malfunctions of the previous day had never occurred. Tyler and Michael wasted no time in beginning their descent from the ledge. But even as they rappelled down the cliff face using equipment that now worked perfectly, both men felt the continuing presence of the shadow figures, watching their every movement. The entities had withdrawn from the visible edge of the ridge, but Tyler was convinced that they were still there, monitoring the climbers' departure from their domain. The descent took nearly 4 hours, as Tyler and Michael moved with extreme caution, testing every anchor point and double-checking every piece of equipment. But they reached the base of the cliff without incident, and immediately began the hike back to their vehicle. Neither man spoke about what they had experienced until they were safely off the mountain and back in civilization. Tyler and Michael reported their experience to local climbing authorities and the U.S. Forest Service. But their account was met with skepticism and suggestions that they had experienced altitude sickness, dehydration, or psychological stress. When Tyler insisted that their climbing equipment be examined by experts, the analysis revealed no defects or wear patterns that could explain the malfunctions they had described. Some investigators suggested that electromagnetic interference from unknown sources might have affected metal components of their gear, but no evidence of such interference was detected in the area of Devil's Backbone. Others proposed that psychological factors related to the isolation and stress of technical climbing might have caused the climbers to misperceive normal equipment failures as supernatural phenomena. But Tyler and Michael maintained that what they had experienced was real, and that the shadow figures they had observed were intelligent entities that considered the mountain to be their protected territory. Tyler began researching the folklore and oral traditions associated with the Cumberland Plateau, and discovered that the area had a long history of encounters with what local Cherokee traditions described as mountain spirits or guardians. According to these traditional accounts, certain peaks and cliff faces in the region were considered sacred sites that were protected by ancient entities. These guardians were said to appear to humans who ventured too deeply into their territory, particularly those who showed disrespect for the natural environment or who attempted to conquer the mountains through technological means rather than spiritual understanding. Tyler has never returned to Devil's Backbone, and he now approaches all of his climbing expeditions with a deeper appreciation for the possibility that some places in the wilderness are protected by forces that operate beyond human comprehension. He advises other climbers to be aware of the spiritual as well as physical challenges that may be encountered in the deep mountains, and to show appropriate respect for the ancient powers that may still inhabit these remote places. The experience at Devil's Backbone changed Tyler's entire perspective on mountaineering and his relationship with the natural world. He now views his climbing activities as opportunities for communion with the mountains rather than conquest of them, and he approaches each expedition with humility and reverence for the possibility that he may be entering sacred space that is guarded by entities far older and more powerful than human civilization. This story comes from Professor Amanda Volkoff from the University of Georgia, a respected academic who has dedicated her career to studying folklore and cultural anthropology in the southeastern United States. What began as a routine university-sponsored research expedition into Appalachian legends became something that fundamentally challenged her understanding of the boundary between academic study and lived reality. Professor Volkoff had spent the better part of a decade researching the oral traditions of rural Appalachian communities, focusing particularly on stories of supernatural entities and shape-shifting creatures that had been passed down through generations. Her work was well regarded in academic circles, and she had published several papers on the cultural significance of these legends in maintaining community identity and traditional belief systems. In early 2023, Amanda received approval from her university to conduct an extensive field research project that would take her deep into the remote mountain communities of northern Georgia, eastern Tennessee, and western North Carolina. The project was funded by a substantial grant that allowed her to assemble a small team of graduate students and research assistants, and it was intended to be the foundation for a comprehensive book on Appalachian folklore, Amanda's research team consisted of herself and 3 graduate students. Jennifer Walsh, who was working on her master's thesis in anthropology, David Chen, a doctoral candidate in folklore studies, and Sarah Mitchell, who was pursuing a degree in cultural geography. The team was well equipped with recording equipment, cameras, GPS devices, and camping gear for extended stays in remote areas. The team established their base of operations in the small town of Whistle Creek, Georgia, located in the foothills of the Chattahoochee National Forest. Whistle Creek was chosen specifically because it had maintained strong connections to traditional Appalachian culture, and because several of Amanda's academic contacts had indicated that the residents were generally willing to share their stories with respectful outsiders. Amanda's initial interviews with local residents proceeded exactly as she had expected, based on her previous research experience. The older members of the community were particularly knowledgeable about traditional stories and were eager to share accounts that had been passed down through their families for generations. Many of these stories centered around creatures that could assume both human and animal forms, entities that were both feared and respected in the local folklore. But as Amanda delved deeper into these stories, she began to encounter a pattern that troubled her from an academic perspective. The most knowledgeable informants, particularly the elderly women who served as the primary keepers of oral tradition in the community, would become evasive or even hostile when she pressed for specific details about certain creatures or locations. One elderly woman, whom Amanda refers to only as Mrs. Henderson out of respect for her privacy, became particularly agitated when Amanda asked about skinwalkers and their relationship to specific geographic locations in the area. Mrs. Henderson warned Amanda that some stories were not meant to be told to outsiders and that academic curiosity could lead to consequences that no university training could prepare her for. Despite these warnings, Amanda felt compelled to pursue her research with the thoroughness that her academic training demanded. She believed that documenting these stories in their complete form was essential for preserving an important part of Appalachian cultural heritage, and she was convinced that approaching the subject matter with scholarly objectivity would protect her team from any negative consequences that local superstitions might suggest. It was this conviction that led Amanda to make what she now considers the greatest mistake of her academic career. During her 3rd week in Whistle Creek, several informants had made vague references to an area in the nearby forest that was connected to skinwalker stories, but that none of them would identify specifically. Amanda became determined to locate this site, believing that finding and documenting it would provide crucial evidence for her research. Against the explicit advice of her local contacts, Amanda organized an expedition into the forest with 2 of her graduate students, Jennifer and David. Using topographical maps and GPS coordinates derived from oblique references in her interviews, the team set out to locate what they theorized might be a site of traditional spiritual significance. The forest expedition began normally enough. Amanda and her students followed established trails for the first several hours, documenting their route and taking photographs of various landmarks. But as they moved deeper into the forest, following increasingly faint paths that seemed to lead away from any officially maintained trail system, the environment around them began to change in ways that Amanda initially attributed to the natural characteristics of old-growth forest. The canopy became thicker and darker, blocking out most of the daylight even though it was early afternoon. The sounds of birds and small animals, which had been constant during the early part of their hike, gradually faded until the forest was completely silent except for the sound of their own footsteps. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees, and Amanda noticed that none of them was sweating despite the physical exertion of hiking uphill through dense undergrowth. After approximately 4 hours of hiking, Amanda's team discovered what appeared to be the site they had been searching for. They emerged into a circular clearing that was completely unlike the surrounding forest. The trees at the edge of the clearing were twisted and gnarled in ways that Amanda had never seen before. Their bark scarred with what looked like deliberate markings rather than natural damage from weather or animals. The floor of the clearing was bare earth, completely devoid of the leaf litter, fallen branches, and undergrowth that covered the forest floor everywhere else in the area. The soil appeared to have been disturbed recently, showing patterns that looked almost like symbols or geometric designs. But Amanda could not determine what might have created these markings. As Amanda and her students began to document the clearing with photographs and detailed notes, they discovered clear evidence that they were not the first people to visit this location recently. Fresh footprints were visible in the disturbed soil. But these prints were unlike anything Amanda had encountered in her years of wilderness research. They appeared to be human in basic shape, but were elongated and showed claw-like marks at the tips of what should have been toes. The footprints followed a pattern that led from the edge of the clearing to a formation of large rocks covered with moss and lichen. As Amanda's team approached these rocks to investigate further, they began to hear sounds from the surrounding forest that made it clear they were no longer alone in this remote location. The sounds were unlike anything Amanda had heard in decades of wilderness research. They included low, guttural vocalizations that seemed to come from multiple directions simultaneously, clicking noises that suggested some kind of communication between unseen entities, and occasional howls that were far too deep and resonant to come from any known species of wolf or coyote. Amanda later described the experience of hearing these sounds as profoundly unsettling in ways that went beyond simple fear of wild animals. The sounds seemed to be deliberately directed at the research team, as if the unseen entities producing them were aware of the humans' presence and were responding to their intrusion into the clearing. As the sounds from the forest intensified, Amanda made the decision to retreat from the clearing and return to their base camp. But as the team packed their equipment and prepared to leave, Amanda noticed that the forest around them had changed. The paths they had followed to reach the clearing were no longer visible, and their GPS devices were providing contradictory readings that made navigation impossible. The team spent nearly 2 hours trying to find their way out of the forest before finally locating a trail that led back toward Whistle Creek. But during this disorienting period, they experienced phenomena that convinced Amanda that their academic research had crossed a line into something far more dangerous than she had anticipated. David reported seeing shadowy figures moving between the trees, figures that seemed to be following the team's movements, but always stayed just outside of clear visual range. Jennifer's camera began malfunctioning, taking pictures automatically and producing images that showed strange light anomalies and dark shapes that were not visible to the naked eye. Amanda herself experienced the overwhelming sensation of being watched by multiple entities that were capable of moving through the forest with complete silence despite their apparent size. When the team finally returned to their base camp in Whistle Creek, they discovered that several hours had passed beyond what their documented hiking time should have accounted for. According to their watches and the daylight, they had been in the forest for over 8 hours, but their detailed logs showed only 4 hours of actual hiking and research time. That night, Amanda was awakened by sounds outside her tent that she initially assumed were produced by local wildlife. But when she looked outside, she saw a tall, humanoid figure standing at the edge of their campsite, silhouetted against the moonlight. The figure appeared to be watching the tent where Amanda and her students were sleeping, and it remained motionless for several minutes before disappearing into the darkness. Over the following days, Amanda's research expedition was plagued by increasingly frequent and disturbing encounters with entities that seemed to be monitoring their activities. Team members reported seeing shadowy figures during both daylight and nighttime hours. Electronic equipment continued to malfunction in ways that could not be explained by technical problems. And all 4 members of the research team experienced vivid dreams that seemed to be connected to their discovery of the clearing in the forest. The most significant encounter occurred during Amanda's final week in Whistle Creek, when she decided to take a solo evening walk to reflect on the research she had gathered and plan her team's departure from the area. As she walked along a trail near their campsite, Amanda came face to face with an entity that she could only describe as a skinwalker in the exact sense that her informants had described. The creature appeared to be simultaneously human and animal, with features that shifted and changed as Amanda observed it. At times, it looked like a tall, thin human figure. But its proportions were wrong, and its movement suggested that its joints functioned differently from normal human anatomy. At other times, it appeared more wolf-like, with fur and elongated limbs, but it maintained an upright posture and displayed obvious intelligence in its behavior. The entity stood approximately 20 feet from Amanda on the trail, making no aggressive moves, but clearly studying her with the same scientific curiosity that she had brought to her research into its existence. Amanda later described the encounter as lasting for several minutes, during which she felt no immediate physical threat, but experienced an overwhelming sense that she was being evaluated by something far older and more powerful than human civilization. The skinwalker eventually moved off the trail and disappeared into the forest, but not before Amanda gained the distinct impression that it had deliberately allowed her to see it, and that the encounter was intended as some kind of message or warning related to her research activities. Amanda concluded her research expedition the following day and returned to the university with extensive documentation of local folklore, but also with a fundamentally changed understanding of the relationship between academic study and traditional knowledge. Her experience had convinced her that some subjects of anthropological research are not simply cultural artifacts to be documented and analyzed, but are living realities that must be approached with respect and humility. Professor Volkov has continued her research into Appalachian folklore, but she now approaches her work with a deep appreciation for the warnings and boundaries that traditional knowledge keepers have maintained for generations. She advises other researchers who work in similar areas to recognize that academic curiosity, while valuable, must be balanced with respect for the wisdom of the communities they study, and an understanding that some knowledge comes with responsibilities that extend beyond scholarly publication. Amanda's experience serves as a reminder that the line between folklore and reality may be far thinner than academic training typically acknowledges, and that researchers who venture into the deep places of traditional knowledge must be prepared to encounter truths that challenge the fundamental assumptions of modern scholarship. This final story comes from Jesse Crawford, a third-generation resident of the Tennessee mountains whose family has deep roots in the region's complex history with illegal whiskey production. Jesse shared with us an account that reveals how the sins of the past can reach across decades to claim payment from those who dare to walk in the footsteps of their ancestors. Jesse's great-grandfather, Elijah Crawford, had been one of the most successful moonshine runners in eastern Tennessee during the Prohibition era of the 1920s and early 1930s. Elijah operated an extensive network of hidden stills deep in the Smoky Mountains and used secret trails known only to a select few to transport his product to buyers in towns throughout the region. The Crawford family's illegal operation had made them wealthy by local standards, but it had also made them enemies of both federal agents and rival bootleggers. According to family stories that Jesse had heard throughout his childhood, Elijah Crawford's success had not been achieved through luck or superior whiskey alone. The old-timers in the family spoke in whispers about deals Elijah had made with entities in the deep woods, agreements that protected his stills and his runners from discovery by law enforcement. But that came with prices that would not be fully understood until generations later. Jesse had always dismissed these stories as colorful family folklore, the kind of supernatural embellishments that often grew around figures who had achieved legendary status in their communities. But in the fall of 2023, financial pressures led Jesse to make a decision that would force him to confront the possibility that his great-grandfather's legacy involved more than just illegal whiskey. Jesse had been struggling to maintain the family property, a substantial tract of forested land that had been in the Crawford family for over a century. Rising property taxes and medical expenses for his aging parents had put Jesse in a desperate financial situation. And he was facing the possibility of having to sell land that represented his family's entire heritage in the Tennessee mountains. It was during this period of financial stress that Jesse remembered something his grandfather had told him years earlier about hidden caches of valuable items that Elijah Crawford had supposedly buried throughout the family property. According to his grandfather, Elijah had not trusted banks with his bootlegging profits and had instead hidden gold coins, silver, and other valuables in locations known only to the Crawford family. Jesse's grandfather had provided him with a hand-drawn map that supposedly showed the locations of several of these hidden caches, along with cryptic directions for following the same secret trails that Elijah had used to move his moonshine without detection. Jesse's grandfather had warned him that the trails were dangerous and that some parts of the family property were better left undisturbed. But he had never provided specific details about what those dangers might be. Driven by desperation and skepticism about his grandfather's warnings, Jesse decided to use the map to search for the hidden caches. The map showed a complex network of trails that connected various points throughout the Crawford property. Trails that were not visible on any modern topographical maps, and that Jesse had never encountered during his many years of hunting and hiking on the family land. On a cold November morning, Jesse set out with metal detector, digging tools and camping gear to follow his great-grandfather's secret routes and search for the buried treasure that might save his family's property. The map indicated that the largest cache was located at the end of a trail that led deep into the most remote section of the Crawford land, an area that Jesse had always avoided because of its difficult terrain and dense forest coverage. Following the cryptic directions on his grandfather's map, Jesse located what appeared to be the beginning of Elijah's hidden trail system. The trail was barely visible, overgrown after decades of disuse, but it followed a logical route through the forest that avoided open areas where moonshine runners might have been spotted by law enforcement or rival bootleggers. As Jesse followed the trail deeper into the forest, he began to understand why his great-grandfather's operation had been so successful. The route was ingeniously designed to take advantage of natural features that provided concealment and multiple escape routes. Hidden caches along the trail contained the remains of supply depots where runners could rest and resupply during long journeys through the mountains. But as Jesse moved further along the trail, he began to encounter evidence that suggested his great-grandfather's success might have involved more than just clever route planning and knowledge of the terrain. At several points along the trail, Jesse discovered stone cairns and carved symbols that appeared to be much older than the Prohibition era. These markers seemed to follow patterns that suggested they were part of some kind of spiritual or ritualistic system rather than simple navigation aids. The most unsettling discovery came when Jesse reached a clearing that his map marked as the location of the largest cache. The clearing was dominated by an ancient oak tree that must have been centuries old. And carved into the trunk of this tree were symbols that Jesse recognized from Cherokee petroglyphs he had seen in museums. But mixed with these traditional markings were other symbols that appeared to have been carved more recently, possibly during his great-grandfather's era. As Jesse used his metal detector to search the area around the oak tree, he began to hear sounds from the surrounding forest that reminded him of stories his grandfather had told about the supernatural aspects of Elijah's moonshine operation. The sounds included low humming that seemed to come from multiple directions, whispered voices speaking in languages Jesse did not recognize, and the occasional sound of footsteps moving through the forest in patterns that suggested multiple entities circling the clearing. Jesse's metal detector began to produce erratic readings, indicating the presence of buried metal objects, but providing inconsistent information about their location and depth. As he dug in the areas where the strongest signals were detected, Jesse discovered not the gold and silver he had expected to find, but rather a collection of artifacts that suggested his great-grandfather's relationship with the supernatural forces of the forest had been far more complex than family stories had indicated. The buried items included carved wooden tokens bearing symbols that matched those on the oak tree, metal amulets that appeared to be made of silver and iron, and a leather-bound journal written in Elijah Crawford's distinctive handwriting. As Jesse read through his great-grandfather's journal, he discovered detailed accounts of negotiations with entities that Elijah described as the guardians of the mountain, agreements that granted protection for his moonshine operation in exchange for payments that would be collected from future generations of the Crawford family. According to the journal, Elijah had encountered these entities during his early attempts to establish stills in the deep forest, and they had offered him a bargain that would ensure his success but would bind his descendants to ongoing obligations. The journal described ceremonies that Elijah had participated in, offerings he had made, and warnings he had received about the consequences of failing to honor the agreements he had made. As Jesse read these disturbing revelations about his family's history, the sounds from the forest intensified, and he became aware that he was no longer alone in the clearing. Tall, shadowy figures began to emerge from the tree line, figures that moved with the same fluid grace that other witnesses had described in their encounters with supernatural entities in the Appalachian wilderness. The figures approached Jesse slowly and deliberately, and he understood instinctively that they were the same guardians his great-grandfather had written about in his journal. They had been waiting for decades for a Crawford descendant to return to the clearing and acknowledge the obligations that Elijah had incurred on behalf of his family. Jesse's encounter with these entities lasted for several hours, during which he experienced what he can only describe as a direct communication with intelligences that were far older and more powerful than human civilization. The Guardians explained to Jesse that his great-grandfather's success had come at a price that was now due, and that the Crawford family's continued prosperity and protection depended on Jesse's willingness to honor the agreements that Elijah had made. Jesse returned from the forest that day with a profound understanding of his family's true legacy and the responsibilities that came with it. He found no gold or silver caches that could solve his immediate financial problems, but he discovered something far more valuable and far more dangerous: knowledge of his family's ongoing relationship with the supernatural guardians of the Tennessee mountains. Jesse has never spoken publicly about the specific details of his encounter with the mountain guardians or the obligations he accepted on behalf of his family. But he was able to resolve his financial difficulties through means he describes only as traditional arrangements that honor old agreements. And the Crawford family property remains in family hands. Jesse now serves as a keeper of his family's true history and warns others who might be tempted to explore the abandoned moonshine trails that some paths through the mountains lead to destinations that demand payment in forms that money cannot provide. The legacy of the Prohibition era, he says, includes debts that span generations and agreements that bind families to obligations that most people would never understand. The Moonshine Runner's route remains hidden in the Tennessee mountains, but Jesse Crawford's experience serves as a reminder that the past is never truly buried, and that some family secrets come with responsibilities that extend far beyond the memories of those who created them.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we venture into the frozen frontier of terror with 8 of the most disturbing true Alaskan missing tourist horror stories ever documented. These harrowing testimonies emerge not from fiction or hearsay, but from meticulously investigated disappearances that have left both authorities and families searching for answers in America's last wilderness. Each account exposes the unforgiving nature of Alaska's remote landscapes, where tourists seeking adventure instead found themselves vanishing without explanation into the vast tundra, treacherous mountains, and endless stretches of Arctic wilderness. The evidence has been carefully gathered from official reports, witness statements, and search and rescue documentation, guaranteeing that every detail remains grounded in verifiable fact, though certain personal identifiers have been altered to respect the privacy of those affected. If you have not yet become part of our dedicated community of true horror followers, please subscribe to Buried Files and enable the notification bell so you never miss an episode when we explore the darkness that lurks in our world. Make sure to leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on these cases or any experiences you may have had in Alaska's remote wilderness. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. The final text message from Dr. Marites Buenafe arrived at her family's phones at exactly 7:35 in the morning on July 1st, 2025. The 62-year-old physician from Lexington, Kentucky had typed out her plans with the methodical precision that characterized everything she did. She was taking the Mount Roberts tramway to the summit and would hike the popular Gold Ridge to Gastineau Peak Trail, a moderately challenging 4-mile route that promised spectacular views of Juneau and the surrounding wilderness. Her message was cheerful and confident, signed off with her characteristic optimism about the adventure that lay ahead. She had no way of knowing that those words would become the last communication her loved ones would ever receive from her. Dr. Buenafe had been traveling aboard the Norwegian Bliss cruise ship as part of a week-long Alaska expedition that had departed from Seattle, fulfilling a lifelong dream of exploring America's final frontier. She was not traveling alone on the cruise itself, having been accompanied by 2 family members who shared her passion for outdoor adventures and natural beauty. However, she had chosen to tackle this particular hike solo, confident in her abilities as an experienced outdoorswoman who had spent decades building the physical fitness and mental toughness required for challenging wilderness excursions. Her colleagues at UK Healthcare knew her as someone who approached both medicine and mountaineering with the same careful preparation and unwavering determination. The Mount Roberts tramway represented the perfect starting point for Dr. Buenafe's planned adventure, whisking visitors from Juneau's downtown area up 1,800 feet to a scenic overlook that served as the gateway to some of southeastern Alaska's most spectacular hiking opportunities. The tramway had been operating since 1996, providing safe and reliable access to trails that would otherwise require grueling climbs through dense temperate rainforest. From the summit station, hikers could choose from several well-marked routes that ranged from easy nature walks suitable for cruise passengers wearing street clothes to challenging backcountry treks that demanded proper equipment and wilderness experience. Security cameras captured Dr. Buenafe's arrival at the tramway's upper terminal around 7:30 that morning, showing her departing the visitor center buildings with the confident stride of someone who had done this type of hiking many times before. She appeared well prepared for the expedition, wearing appropriate outdoor clothing and carrying what seemed to be adequate supplies for the planned 4-hour round-trip hike. The weather conditions that morning were typical for southeast Alaska in early July. Cloudy skies with intermittent drizzle and temperatures in the mid-50s. Exactly the type of conditions that experienced Alaska hikers learn to expect and prepare for during the brief summer season. The Gold Ridge to Gastineau Peak Trail that Dr. Buenafe had chosen was described by hiking websites as moderately challenging but extremely popular among both locals and tourists who wanted to experience Alaska's wilderness without venturing too far from civilization. The trail gained approximately 900 feet of elevation over its 4-mile length, winding through subalpine meadows filled with wildflowers during the summer months before reaching exposed ridgeline areas that offered panoramic views of the Gastineau Channel, Douglas Island, and the ice-capped peaks of the Coast Range. On clear days, hikers could see for dozens of miles in every direction, but the frequent clouds and precipitation that characterized southeast Alaska's maritime climate often limited visibility to just a few hundred yards. The Norwegian Bliss was scheduled to depart Juneau at 1:30 that afternoon, giving Dr. Buenafe what should have been ample time to complete her planned hike and return to the ship. Cruise itineraries typically build in generous margins for passenger excursions, understanding that weather delays and other unforeseen circumstances can affect timing. However, when 1:30 arrived without any sign of Dr. Buenafe, ship personnel began the standard protocols for passengers who failed to return by the all-aboard deadline. They attempted to contact her through the ship's public address system and tried calling her cell phone, but received no response to either method of communication. By 3:15 that afternoon, with the Norwegian Bliss already departed from Juneau and Dr. Buenafe still missing, her family members contacted local authorities to report her disappearance. The Alaska State Troopers immediately launched a comprehensive search and rescue operation, coordinating with multiple agencies that had extensive experience in Southeast Alaska's challenging terrain. Juneau Mountain Rescue, widely regarded as one of the most skilled volunteer search and rescue organizations in the state, deployed their most experienced teams to begin systematic ground searches along the trail Dr. Buenafe had planned to hike. The initial search efforts benefited from the long daylight hours of early July, when Juneau experiences nearly 19 hours of usable light each day. Ground teams equipped with specialized equipment began hiking the Gold Ridge Trail in both directions, looking for any signs that Dr. Buenafe had passed through the area or encountered difficulties along the route. Search and rescue dogs trained to detect human scent were brought in from Southeast Alaska Dogs for organized ground search, a volunteer organization that had participated in dozens of successful rescues throughout the region. The dogs would prove crucial in search operations, as their sensitive noses could detect traces of human presence that might be invisible to even the most experienced human searchers. Aerial searches began almost immediately, utilizing both Alaska State Trooper helicopters and aircraft from the United States Coast Guard that were specially equipped for search and rescue operations in Alaska's demanding conditions. The helicopters carried thermal imaging equipment capable of detecting body heat through forest canopies and cloud cover, technology that had proven successful in previous search operations throughout Southeast Alaska. However, the weather conditions that had been merely unpleasant for hiking became serious obstacles for aerial searches, with low clouds and intermittent precipitation limiting visibility and making it dangerous for aircraft to operate at low altitudes in the mountainous terrain. The search operation expanded dramatically on the second day, with more than a dozen professional volunteers from Juneau Mountain Rescue joining Alaska State Troopers and Juneau Police Department officers in an extensive grid search that utilized drones, additional search dogs, and expanded ground teams. The searchers methodically covered every accessible area along the planned hiking route, looking not only for Dr. Buenafe herself, but for any equipment, clothing, or other signs that might indicate what had happened during her hike. Despite these exhaustive efforts, the teams found no trace of the missing physician, a result that was both frustrating and increasingly ominous as the hours turned into days. Weather conditions continued to hamper the search efforts throughout the second and third days, with low clouds and rain limiting the effectiveness of both ground and aerial teams. Southeast Alaska's maritime climate can change rapidly, and what had begun as merely cloudy conditions on the morning of Dr. Buenafe's hike deteriorated into the type of weather that makes wilderness travel treacherous, even for experienced outdoors people. The combination of wet conditions, limited visibility, and steep terrain created hazardous conditions for the searchers themselves, forcing search coordinators to balance the urgent need to find Dr. Buenafe against the safety of the dozens of people risking their lives to locate her. The breakthrough came on Thursday morning, July 4th, when the crew of an Alaska Army National Guard helicopter spotted something unusual approximately 1,700 feet below the Gold Ridge ridgeline. Using specialized equipment and flying techniques developed specifically for Alaska's challenging search and rescue environment, the helicopter crew was able to confirm that they had located Dr. Buenafe's body in an area that would have been extremely difficult for ground searchers to access safely. The location was far below the established hiking trail, suggesting that she had either fallen or become disoriented and wandered off the marked route during her attempted hike. The recovery operation required careful coordination between Alaska State Troopers, Juneau Mountain Rescue, Temsco helicopters, and the Alaska Army National Guard, utilizing specialized high-angle rescue techniques to safely retrieve Dr. Buenafe's body from the remote location where she had been found. The challenging terrain and continued poor weather conditions made the recovery operation nearly as dangerous as the original search had been, demonstrating the extreme difficulties that face anyone who ventures into Southeast Alaska's wilderness areas without proper preparation and support. The successful recovery was a testament to the skill and dedication of Alaska's search and rescue community. But it came too late to save Dr. Buenafe's life. Dr. Buenafe's body was transported to the Alaska State Medical Examiner's office for an autopsy that would determine the exact cause of her death, though the circumstances of her discovery suggested that she had likely fallen from the ridge area during her attempted hike. The investigation would examine whether weather conditions, equipment failure, medical emergency, or other factors had contributed to the tragedy that claimed the life of a skilled physician who had simply wanted to experience the natural beauty of Alaska during her vacation. Her death served as a sobering reminder that even experienced hikers can encounter unexpected dangers in Alaska's wilderness areas, where rescue may be hours or days away and where weather conditions can change from pleasant to life-threatening in a matter of minutes. The loss of Dr. Marites Buenafe deeply affected not only her family and colleagues at UK Healthcare, but also the broader community of outdoor enthusiasts who recognized that her tragedy could have befallen any of them under similar circumstances. Norwegian Cruise Line expressed their condolences and provided support to her family through their crisis response team, while the various search and rescue organizations reflected on lessons learned that might help prevent similar tragedies in the future. Dr. Buenafe's death highlighted the inherent risks that exist whenever people venture into Alaska's wilderness areas, no matter how well prepared or experienced they might be, and served as a reminder that the mountains and forests of the last frontier demand constant respect and vigilance from those who seek to explore their beauty. The June afternoon when Joseph Balderas disappeared from Nome, Alaska was supposed to mark the beginning of his new life in America's final frontier. At 36 years old, the Texas native had driven over 3,000 miles to reach this remote settlement perched on the edge of the Bering Sea, leaving behind the suffocating heat of Houston for the promise of adventure and opportunity in the last frontier. His girlfriend Megan Ryder had followed him just 2 weeks later, their hearts full of dreams about building a future together in a place where the summer sun barely set and the winter aurora painted the sky in impossible colors. Joseph had secured work with a local construction company that specialized in maintaining the harsh infrastructure needed to survive in subarctic conditions. The pay was excellent, nearly double what he had earned back in Texas, and the housing was surprisingly affordable for a man accustomed to big city prices. Nome might have been isolated, accessible only by small aircraft or seasonal barge, but it offered something Houston never could: the chance to be part of a tight-knit community where everyone knew your name and your neighbors would risk their lives to help you survive the brutal winters that claimed the unprepared. Megan had been more hesitant about the move, concerned about leaving her teaching job and the family they had known all their lives. But Joseph's enthusiasm proved contagious, and his detailed phone calls describing the stunning landscapes and genuine warmth of the locals gradually won her over. He talked about hiking the tundra that stretched endlessly toward the horizon, about learning to pan for gold in the creeks where prospectors had struck it rich over a century ago, about the incredible silence that settled over the land when the wind stopped blowing. In his letters, he painted pictures of a place where they could truly start fresh, away from the complications and disappointments that had followed them in Texas. The couple had been planning their engagement for months, with Joseph intending to propose during the brief summer when Nome transformed from a snow-covered outpost into a bustling hub of mining activity and tourism. He had already picked out a ring from one of the local jewelry stores, a simple band embedded with genuine Alaskan gold that would symbolize their new beginning in this incredible wilderness. Their wedding would be small and intimate, perhaps held on the beach where the Bering Sea met the tundra, with the midnight sun providing natural illumination for their ceremony. On June 24th, Joseph set out alone for what was supposed to be a short hiking expedition into the tundra northeast of Nome. He had been planning the trip for days, studying topographical maps with local residents who warned him about the deceptive nature of the landscape, where gentle rolling hills could quickly give way to treacherous bogs and hidden creeks. The weather forecast called for clear skies and temperatures in the mid-60s, perfect conditions for exploring the wildflowers that carpeted the Arctic plains during the brief summer season. He carried a fully stocked backpack with emergency supplies, a GPS unit, and enough food and water for 2 days, even though he planned to return by evening. Megan was working her first shift at the local elementary school, helping with their summer reading program when Joseph kissed her goodbye that morning. He promised to be back in time for dinner, excited to share whatever discoveries he might make during his exploration of their new homeland. She remembers him standing in their tiny apartment doorway, backpack slung over his shoulder, his face bright with the kind of anticipation she had not seen since they were teenagers planning their first camping trip together. That image would haunt her for years afterward. Joseph silhouetted against the endless Arctic daylight, waving goodbye with no idea he would never return home. When Joseph failed to appear by midnight, Megan began making phone calls to his co-workers and the few local friends they had begun to cultivate. Nome operated on a different schedule during the summer months, with many residents staying active well into the traditional nighttime hours, taking advantage of the perpetual daylight to accomplish tasks that would be impossible during the dark winter months. But nobody had seen Joseph since he left town that morning, and his cell phone went straight to voicemail, suggesting he was either in an area with no coverage or his battery had died. The Nome Police Department launched a search operation at dawn the next day, coordinating with Alaska State Troopers and local volunteer search and rescue teams who knew the surrounding terrain better than anyone. They found Joseph's backpack approximately 8 miles northeast of town, sitting upright against a small boulder as if he had carefully placed it there before walking away. The backpack contained all of his supplies: food, water, emergency shelter, first aid kit, even his wallet and identification. The only items missing were the clothes he had been wearing and the small digital camera he always carried to document their Alaskan adventures. What disturbed the search teams most was the complete absence of any trail leading away from the backpack. The tundra around Nome preserves footprints remarkably well during the summer months, when the permafrost creates a solid base beneath the surface vegetation. Joseph's tracks were clearly visible, leading to the spot where they found his pack, but there were no footprints indicating which direction he might have traveled afterward. The search dogs brought in from Anchorage lost his scent at the same location, as if he had simply vanished into the thin Arctic air. As the search expanded to cover over 50 square miles of tundra, Megan began learning about Nome's dark history of unexplained disappearances. Local residents, initially reluctant to discuss the subject with outsiders, gradually opened up about the 24 people who had vanished from the area between 1960 and 2004. Most of the missing were men between the ages of 20 and 40, many of them newcomers to Alaska, who had come north seeking work or adventure just like Joseph. The FBI had investigated these disappearances extensively but never found evidence of foul play, concluding that the harsh environment and isolation were the most likely explanations. The revelation that Joseph was not Nome's first unexplained disappearance sent shockwaves through the small community and created deep divisions among residents. Some believed that discussing the missing people would damage Nome's reputation and hurt the tourism industry that provided crucial seasonal income. Others argued that the families deserved answers and that ignoring the pattern would only put more lives at risk. Longtime residents whispered about everything from serial killers to supernatural forces, while newer arrivals like Megan demanded thorough investigations and accountability from law enforcement. Megan threw herself into researching every detail of the previous disappearances, spending countless hours at the Nome Library and interviewing elderly residents who remembered the earlier cases. She discovered disturbing patterns. Many of the missing had been described as experienced outdoorsmen who should have known how to survive in the wilderness. Several had left behind personal belongings in locations where they seemed to have vanished without explanation, and almost none of the bodies had ever been recovered despite extensive searches. The lack of physical evidence was particularly troubling in a landscape where human remains should be preserved by the cold, dry conditions. The search for Joseph continued for 3 weeks, utilizing helicopters, all-terrain vehicles, trained search dogs, and dozens of volunteers who combed every accessible square mile of tundra around Nome. Alaska State Troopers brought in specialized equipment designed for Arctic conditions, including ground-penetrating radar that could detect buried objects beneath the permafrost. The Coast Guard searched the coastline in case Joseph had somehow made his way to the Bering Sea, while local pilots flew grid patterns over the vast wilderness that stretched toward Siberia. Despite these exhaustive efforts, no trace of Joseph was ever found. As summer turned to autumn and the search was officially suspended, Megan faced the devastating reality that she might never know what happened to the man she had planned to marry. The stress of the disappearance and the community tensions it had created made staying in Nome unbearable. But leaving felt like abandoning Joseph to whatever fate had befallen him in the unforgiving wilderness. She struggled with guilt over not insisting on accompanying him that final morning, wondering if her presence might have prevented the tragedy or at least provided answers about what had occurred in those crucial moments when he disappeared. The case attracted national attention when podcast investigator Payne Lindsay arrived in Nome years later to examine both Joseph's disappearance and the subsequent vanishing of Florence Okpialuk in 2020. His investigation revealed the deep mistrust and paranoia that had infected the community, with residents reluctant to share information and law enforcement agencies sometimes working at cross purposes. The attention brought new scrutiny to Nome's history of missing persons, but also intensified the divisions that had been tearing the town apart since Joseph first walked into the tundra and vanished without explanation. Today, Joseph's disappearance remains one of Alaska's most haunting unsolved mysteries, a reminder of how quickly the frontier can reclaim those who underestimate its power. Megan eventually returned to Texas, but she continues to advocate for missing persons cases and maintains hope that someday the tundra will reveal its secrets and provide the closure that has eluded her for so many years. Joseph's story serves as a sobering warning for anyone tempted by Alaska's beauty to remember that the last frontier demands respect, preparation, and an understanding that some who venture into its embrace are never allowed to leave. The morning of October 16, 1972 dawned clear and cold across south-central Alaska, with the first hints of winter already painting the mountaintops in pristine white. At Anchorage International Airport, a small Cessna 310C bearing tail number N1812H sat on the tarmac, its twin engines warming up for what should have been a routine 3-hour flight to Juneau. The aircraft carried 4 passengers whose names would become legendary in Alaskan aviation history. House Majority Leader Thomas Hale Boggs from Louisiana, Alaska Congressman Nicholas Joseph Begich, Begich's aide Russell Brown, and pilot Don Johns. None of them could have imagined that their departure at 8:56 that morning would mark the beginning of one of the most extensive search operations in American history, or that their disappearance would give birth to decades of speculation about everything from political conspiracy to supernatural phenomena in the region that would later be dubbed the Alaska Triangle. Hale Boggs had arrived in Alaska as part of a 48-hour campaign blitz designed to support his colleague Nick Begich, who was facing a surprisingly competitive re-election battle against Republican challenger Don Young. At 58 years old, Boggs was one of the most powerful politicians in Washington, having served 14 non-consecutive terms in the House of Representatives and wielding considerable influence as the Democratic Majority Leader. His presence in Alaska was particularly significant because he and Begich had been on opposite sides of a leadership contest just a year earlier, making this campaign trip as much about party unity as it was about electoral politics. The two men had spent the previous evening at a fundraising event in Anchorage, where Boggs had delivered his characteristic passionate speeches about democratic values and the importance of Alaska's voice in Congress. Nick Begich, at 39, represented the new generation of Alaskan political leadership, a man who understood both the unique challenges facing America's largest state and the complex relationship between Alaska and the federal government. Born and raised in Minnesota, Begich had moved to Alaska in the early 1960s, establishing himself as an educator and community leader before winning election to Congress in 1970. His campaign for re-election was focused on bringing federal resources to Alaska, while protecting the state's independence and natural resources from what he saw as overreaching federal bureaucracy. The flight to Juneau was intended to be the final stop on a statewide campaign tour that would culminate in a major fundraising event designed to give Begich the financial resources needed for the final push toward Election Day. The weather forecast for the flight had called for marginal visual flight rules conditions along the route, with low clouds and possible icing conditions in the mountain passes between Anchorage and Juneau. Don Johns, the pilot employed by Pan Alaska Airways, was an experienced aviator who had flown this route numerous times and understood the challenges posed by Alaska's rapidly changing weather patterns. The Cessna 310C was a capable twin-engine aircraft, well-suited for Alaska's demanding conditions. Equipped with the necessary instruments for flying in challenging weather and powered by reliable engines that had proven themselves throughout the state's aviation community. However, the aircraft was not equipped with an emergency locator transmitter, despite Alaska state regulations that had recently been enacted requiring such devices on aircraft operating in the territory. At 9:09 that morning, Don Johns made his final radio contact with Anchorage Air Traffic Control, requesting updated weather information as the aircraft approached the mountainous terrain surrounding Portage Pass. This routine communication gave no indication of any problems aboard the aircraft, and weather conditions at the time appeared to be within acceptable limits for the flight to continue. The planned route would take the Cessna through some of Alaska's most spectacular but challenging terrain, including mountain passes where sudden weather changes could create treacherous flying conditions and vast wilderness areas where a downed aircraft might remain hidden for decades. After that final radio transmission, N1812H vanished from all radar screens and never made another verifiable radio contact, disappearing somewhere over the trackless wilderness between Anchorage and Juneau. When the Cessna failed to arrive in Juneau by its scheduled arrival time of noon, airport authorities initiated standard overdue aircraft procedures, attempting to establish radio contact and alerting search and rescue coordinators about the missing flight. By early afternoon, it became clear that something serious had happened to the aircraft carrying two of America's most prominent politicians, and a massive search operation was launched that would eventually involve every branch of the military, the Coast Guard, Civil Air Patrol, and dozens of civilian pilots who volunteered their aircraft and expertise. The initial search focused on the planned flight route, particularly the mountain passes and glaciated terrain where weather-related accidents were most likely to occur. The search operation that followed would become the largest and most extensive in Alaskan history, ultimately involving more than 400 aircraft and thousands of personnel over the course of 39 days. Coast Guard cutters searched the waters of Prince William Sound and the Gulf of Alaska, while Army and Air Force helicopters combed the mountainous terrain along the flight route. Civil Air Patrol volunteers flew hundreds of hours in small aircraft, systematically searching every valley and glacier for any sign of the missing Cessna. The search was complicated by Alaska's vast distances and challenging terrain, as well as weather conditions that frequently grounded aircraft and limited visibility to just a few hundred feet. Despite the enormous resources devoted to finding N1812H, searchers never located so much as a single piece of debris from the aircraft. The failure to find any trace of the aircraft led to intense speculation about what might have caused the disappearance, with theories ranging from mechanical failure and weather-related accidents to far more sinister explanations involving political conspiracy and sabotage. Some observers noted that Hale Boggs had been increasingly critical of FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover and had called for investigations into government surveillance activities, leading to speculation that the disappearance might have been orchestrated by federal agencies seeking to silence a troublesome politician. These conspiracy theories were fueled by the complete absence of any physical evidence from the crash site, which seemed unusual even by Alaska standards, where aircraft accidents typically left at least some recoverable debris. The investigation into the disappearance revealed several troubling details about the flight preparation and equipment aboard N1812H. The National Transportation Safety Board determined that the aircraft was not equipped with a functioning emergency locator transmitter, despite Alaska state regulations requiring such devices on aircraft operating in remote areas. Investigators discovered that Don Johns's portable emergency transmitter had been left behind in another aircraft at Fairbanks, and witnesses reported seeing an unidentified object in the pilot's briefcase that resembled but was not identical to a portable emergency locator device. This lack of emergency equipment meant that even if the aircraft had survived an initial impact, searchers would have had no electronic signal to guide them to the crash site. Radio operators throughout Alaska reported hearing fragmentary transmissions that might have come from the missing aircraft during the days following the disappearance. But none of these reports could be conclusively verified or used to narrow the search area. The reported transmissions included garbled voices that some listeners believed sounded like distress calls. But the poor quality and brief duration of these signals made positive identification impossible. These unconfirmed radio contacts only added to the mystery surrounding the flight, raising questions about whether the aircraft had survived an initial emergency, only to crash later in a location even more remote than the planned flight route. The political implications of the disappearance became apparent almost immediately, as both Boggs and Begich were on the ballot for the November election despite being missing and presumed dead. In one of the stranger chapters of American electoral history, both men were re-elected to Congress while search operations for their aircraft continued. Hale Boggs was succeeded in office by his wife Lindy, who would serve 8 terms representing Louisiana's 2nd Congressional District, while Nick Begich was ultimately replaced by his Republican challenger Don Young, who would go on to serve Alaska in Congress for the next 49 years until his own death in 2022. The Begich family would continue to play a prominent role in Alaska politics, with Nick's descendants serving in various elected offices, including the United States Senate and the mayoralty of Anchorage. The disappearance of N1812H would become the foundational case for what paranormal investigators later dubbed the Alaska Triangle, a vast area of wilderness bounded roughly by Anchorage, Juneau, and Barrow, where an unusually high number of aircraft and people have vanished without explanation. Proponents of supernatural theories point to the Boggs-Begich disappearance as evidence that mysterious forces operate within this region, noting the complete absence of any recoverable debris and the failure of such an extensive search operation to locate even the smallest trace of the aircraft. Skeptics argue that Alaska's challenging terrain and weather conditions provide sufficient explanation for the disappearance, particularly given the aircraft's lack of proper emergency equipment and the marginal weather conditions along the flight route. Modern technology has renewed interest in solving the 53-year-old mystery, with some investigators suggesting that climate change and glacial melting might eventually reveal the wreckage of N1812H. Several military aircraft that crashed in Alaska during the 1940s and 1950s have been discovered in recent years as glaciers retreat and expose previously hidden crash sites, raising hopes that the Boggs baggage aircraft might someday be found. Advanced search technologies including satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and sophisticated aircraft tracking systems have been proposed for renewed search efforts, though the vast size of the potential search area continues to present enormous challenges. The legacy of the October 16, 1972 disappearance extends far beyond the immediate political consequences, serving as a sobering reminder of the dangers that continue to face aviators operating in Alaska's unforgiving environment. The case influenced federal aviation regulations requiring emergency locator transmitters on aircraft, potentially saving lives in subsequent aviation emergencies. More broadly, the disappearance of two prominent American politicians in Alaska's wilderness underscored the state's remoteness and the risks accepted by anyone who ventures into its vast interior, whether by aircraft, boat, or on foot. Today, the mystery of N1812H remains one of Alaska's most enduring unsolved cases, a testament to the power of the wilderness to reclaim those who dare to challenge its dominion. The autumn wind carried the scent of salt and approaching winter across Nome's West Beach on September 28, 2021, when Florence Okpieluk made her final decision to disappear. The 36-year-old Alaska Native woman had been living in the weathered canvas tent for nearly 3 weeks, part of a growing encampment of homeless individuals who had found themselves displaced in Alaska's harsh economic reality. Florence had moved to Nome from the remote village of Wales, population 145, seeking better opportunities and medical care for her chronic health conditions. What she found instead was a housing crisis that left her camping on the windswept beach while waiting for assistance from overwhelmed social services agencies. Florence's journey to Nome reflected the struggles faced by many Alaska Native people who leave their traditional villages seeking employment, education, or health care in larger communities. Wales, situated on the western tip of the Seward Peninsula just 55 miles from the Siberian coast, offered few opportunities beyond subsistence hunting and fishing. The village had no running water, limited electricity, and healthcare services that required expensive flights to Nome or Anchorage for anything beyond basic first aid. Florence had worked as a village health aide in Wales, providing crucial medical services to her community. But chronic back pain from a childhood injury required specialized treatment that was simply unavailable in her home village. The tent city on Nome's West Beach had grown throughout the summer of 2021 as Alaska's ongoing housing shortage reached crisis levels. Nome, with its population of approximately 3,600 people, struggled to provide adequate housing for both longtime residents and newcomers seeking opportunities in the gold mining industry or government services. The beach encampment existed in a legal gray area, technically on public land but increasingly viewed as a public health and safety concern by local authorities. Florence's tent sat among 8 others, a small community of people who looked out for each other while navigating the complex bureaucracy of social services and housing assistance programs. Those who knew Florence described her as a quiet, thoughtful woman who had maintained her dignity despite difficult circumstances. She spoke fluent Inupiaq and English, serving as an informal translator and advocate for other Alaska Native people in the camp, who struggled with language barriers when dealing with government agencies. Her tent was organized and clean, containing a few personal belongings including family photographs, traditional beadwork supplies, and the medications she needed for her chronic conditions. She had been working with Nome's social services coordinator to secure permanent housing, but the waiting list for affordable apartments stretched for months or even years. On the Churdo evening of September 27th, several residents of the beach camp remembered Florence seeming more anxious than usual, pacing near her tent and making frequent trips to the payphone at the nearby gas station. She had mentioned waiting for an important phone call about a potential housing opportunity, expressing both hope and skepticism that anything would come of it. The other campers noticed she had packed her few belongings into a backpack, though she had not mentioned any plans to leave the area. That night, she shared coffee with her tent neighbors around a small campfire, speaking in Inupiaq about her grandmother's traditional stories and expressing worry about the approaching winter. The morning of September 28th dawned gray and windy, with temperatures in the low 40s and the promise of Alaska's brief autumn rapidly giving way to winter's grip. Florence's tent neighbors remember her being up early, sitting outside her shelter and watching the sunrise over Norton Sound, while drinking instant coffee from a metal camping cup. Around 8 in the morning, she told Martha Kokaluk, the woman whose tent was closest to hers, that she was going for a walk along the beach to clear her head and think about her options. She was wearing her usual outfit: dark jeans, a heavy flannel shirt, a gray hooded sweatshirt, and black sneakers that had seen better days. Martha would later tell investigators that Florence seemed different that morning, more focused and determined than she had appeared in recent days. The two women had developed a friendship based on their shared experience of displacement from traditional villages, and Martha recognized signs of stress and decision-making in her friend's demeanor. Florence had mentioned feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of the housing assistance application process and frustrated by the seemingly endless requirements and documentation needed to qualify for help. She expressed particular anxiety about the approaching winter, knowing that the beach camp would become uninhabitable once Nome's brutal weather arrived in earnest. When Florence failed to return to her tent by afternoon, Martha initially assumed she had found indoor shelter for the day or was dealing with paperwork at one of the social services offices. However, as evening approached and temperatures began dropping, the other camp residents grew concerned and began searching the immediate area. They found Florence's tent exactly as she had left it, with her sleeping bag, medications, and identification documents still inside. Most disturbingly, her heavy winter coat remained in the tent, despite the cooling weather that would have made the garment necessary for anyone planning to spend extended time outdoors. The search expanded the next morning when Martha contacted Nome Police Department to report her friend missing. Officer David Kokiok, himself an Alaska native who understood the cultural nuances of the situation, interviewed the other camp residents and began organizing a systematic search of Nome's limited road system and the extensive beach areas surrounding the community. The initial search focused on locations where Florence might have sought shelter, including abandoned buildings, storage facilities, and areas around the harbor where she might have tried to escape the increasingly harsh weather. Alaska State Troopers joined the search operation on the second day, bringing additional personnel and specialized equipment designed for wilderness searches in Alaska's challenging environment. Trooper Jeff Jacobson, who had extensive experience with missing persons cases involving Alaska Native individuals, coordinated with local tribal organizations and traditional knowledge holders who understood the area's geography and hazards. The search teams utilized all-terrain vehicles to cover the road system connecting Nome to surrounding communities, while volunteers on foot searched the extensive beach areas and tidal zones where someone might have encountered difficulties. The discovery that would haunt investigators came on October 3rd, nearly a week after Florence's disappearance. A group of volunteers searching the beach approximately 2 miles west of the tent camp found Florence's black sneakers, socks, and gray hooded sweatshirt neatly arranged on the sand just above the high tide line. The clothing appeared to have been deliberately placed rather than scattered by wind or waves, and there were no signs of struggle or violence in the surrounding area. Most puzzling was the fact that the item showed no evidence of prolonged exposure to the elements, despite having been missing for nearly a week during a period of harsh weather. The condition and arrangement of Florence's clothing created more questions than answers for investigators trying to understand what had happened during her walk along the beach. The sneakers were placed side by side as if someone had carefully removed them before entering the water, while the socks were tucked inside and the sweatshirt was folded nearby. However, extensive searches of the water and shoreline areas revealed no trace of Florence herself, despite conditions that should have preserved evidence of what had occurred. The discovery site was thoroughly documented and processed for forensic evidence, but investigators found no clear indication of whether Florence had entered the water voluntarily or encountered some other form of harm. The investigation into Florence's disappearance revealed the broader context of missing and murdered Indigenous women and people that has affected Alaska Native communities for generations. Alaska has one of the highest rates of missing Indigenous persons in the United States, with cases often receiving insufficient resources and attention from law enforcement agencies. Florence's case became part of a growing movement demanding better investigation and prevention efforts led by Alaska Native activists who argued that systemic discrimination and cultural misunderstanding contributed to the high number of unresolved cases affecting their communities. The search for Florence continued for weeks, involving helicopter overflights, marine patrols, and ground teams that covered hundreds of square miles of wilderness surrounding Nome. The Alaska Bureau of Investigation brought in specialized equipment, including sonar devices, to search the waters of Norton Sound and ground-penetrating radar to examine areas where Florence might have sought shelter or encountered harm. Despite these extensive efforts, investigators found no additional evidence that could explain what had happened to the missing woman or provide closure for her family and friends. Florence's family from Wales traveled to Nome to participate in the search efforts and advocate for continued investigation into her disappearance. Her sister Agnes Appalachia spoke publicly about the need for better support services for Alaska Native people dealing with homelessness and the importance of treating missing persons cases with appropriate urgency regardless of the victim's housing status. The family organized traditional ceremonies to honor Florence and call for her safe return, drawing attention to the cultural dimensions of the case that outside investigators might not fully understand. The case attracted national attention when podcast investigator Payne Lindsay included Florence's disappearance in his examination of missing persons cases in Nome, Alaska. His investigation revealed the complex social and economic factors that had contributed to Florence's vulnerable situation, as well as the challenges faced by law enforcement agencies investigating cases involving Alaska Native individuals. The podcast brought renewed scrutiny to Nome's history of unexplained disappearances and the ongoing crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people throughout Alaska. Today, Florence Appalachia's disappearance remains officially classified as an open missing persons case, with Alaska State Troopers continuing to follow up on any new information that might explain what happened during her walk along Nome's West Beach. Her tent was eventually removed from the beach encampment, but her personal belongings were carefully preserved by investigators who hoped that someday new evidence might provide answers for her family. Florence's case serves as a sobering reminder of the vulnerabilities faced by Alaska Native people dealing with homelessness and displacement, and the urgent need for better support systems to prevent similar tragedies in America's most remote communities. The weathered fishermen gathered around the scarred wooden table at Port Protection's only saloon tell the story of Lucas Avery with the kind of hushed reverence reserved for the dead and the disappeared. It was a tale that had grown in the telling over the past 3 years, acquiring new details and darker implications with each retelling. But the core facts remained as solid and unforgiving as the granite cliffs that surrounded their remote southeast Alaska community. Lucas Avery, a 32-year-old maritime engineer from Portland, Oregon, had come to Port Protection in August of 2021 seeking the kind of authentic Alaskan experience that cruise ships and tour packages could never provide. Port Protection sits on the northern tip of Prince of Wales Island, a community so remote that it lacks basic infrastructure most Americans take for granted. No roads connect it to the outside world, No electrical grid powers its scattered homes, and no cell phone towers carry signals across the dense temperate rainforest that blankets the surrounding mountains. The 57 residents who call Port Protection home have chosen isolation deliberately, crafting lives built around subsistence fishing, hunting, and the kind of radical self-reliance that Alaska demands from those who venture beyond the reach of modern conveniences. Lucas had read about the community in outdoor magazines and planned his visit as the culminating adventure of a month-long solo journey through Southeast Alaska's Inside Passage. Lucas arrived aboard his 19-foot sea kayak on August 14th, having paddled north from Ketchikan through some of the most challenging waters in Southeast Alaska. The journey had taken him 2 weeks, navigating tidal currents that could reach 8 knots and threading his way between islands where brown bears outnumbered humans by significant margins. Local residents remember him as enthusiastic and well-prepared, carrying high-quality camping equipment and demonstrating the kind of competence on the water that came from years of experience kayaking the Pacific Northwest's demanding coastlines. He had established his camp on a small beach about a mile south of the main settlement, close enough to visit the community but far enough away to maintain the solitude he sought. The residents of Port Protection operate according to an informal but effective communication network based on marine radio frequencies that connect fishing boats, float planes, and the handful of homes equipped with radio equipment. Lucas had purchased a handheld marine radio specifically for his Alaska adventure, programming it with the frequencies used by local fishermen and the Coast Guard station in Ketchikan. During his first week in the area, he checked in regularly with the local radio net, providing updates on his location and plans while gathering information about weather conditions and potential hazards in the surrounding waters. His daily routine followed the rhythms established by experienced sea kayakers operating in Alaska's challenging maritime environment. Lucas would rise before dawn to take advantage of the calm conditions that often prevailed during early morning hours, when tidal currents were manageable and winds had not yet begun building. He spent his days exploring the intricate coastline of Prince of Wales Island, photographing wildlife and documenting his experiences in a waterproof journal that he planned to use for a book about solo wilderness travel. Evenings were devoted to camp maintenance, meal preparation, and radio communication with both local residents and his family back in Oregon. The weather forecast for August 22nd called for typical Southeast Alaska conditions. Overcast skies with periods of light rain and winds from the southeast at 10 to 15 knots. These were well within the parameters that Lucas had established for safe kayaking, and he announced his intention to explore the waters around nearby El Capitan Island during the morning radio net. Several local fishermen acknowledged his transmission and advised him to monitor Channel 16 for any changes in weather conditions, as Southeast Alaska's maritime climate could deteriorate rapidly without warning. The last confirmed communication from Lucas came at 11:47 that morning, when he radioed that he was approaching the northern shore of El Capitan Island and planned to explore several small coves before returning to his camp. When Lucas failed to participate in the evening radio net, Port Protection residents initially assumed he had experienced equipment failure or was simply out of range of the repeater station. However, by the following morning, concern began growing among the tight-knit community, especially when his planned return to camp went unnoticed. Gary Muhlberger, a longtime resident and experienced mariner, organized an informal search party using local fishing boats to check the areas where Lucas had planned to paddle. The searchers found Lucas's empty kayak floating upside down approximately 3 miles northeast of El Capitan Island, its emergency paddle missing and no sign of its occupant. The discovery of the overturned kayak triggered an immediate response from the United States Coast Guard station in Ketchikan, which dispatched a helicopter crew and additional vessels to search the waters around Prince of Wales Island. Coast Guard rescue swimmer Jake Morrison later described the conditions they encountered as challenging but not extreme, with 3 to 4 foot seas and visibility of approximately 2 miles. The search pattern expanded throughout the day to cover more than 50 square miles of water, utilizing both surface vessels and aircraft equipped with thermal imaging equipment capable of detecting a person in the water even in poor visibility conditions. The search operation revealed several disturbing details about Lucas's disappearance that puzzled both Coast Guard personnel and local residents familiar with sea kayaking safety procedures. The kayak's emergency paddle, which should have been secured to the deck with shock cord, was missing entirely, suggesting either equipment failure or that Lucas had been using it when whatever incident occurred took place. More puzzling was the absence of his personal flotation device, which experienced kayakers in Alaska waters typically wear at all times due to the lethally cold water temperatures that can cause incapacitation within minutes of immersion. Local residents familiar with the waters around El Capitan Island noted that the area where Lucas's kayak was found lay directly in the path of strong tidal currents that funnel between the island and the mainland shore. These currents, known locally as the El Capitan Rapids, can reach velocities of up to 6 knots during spring tides, creating standing waves and turbulent conditions that challenge even experienced kayakers. However, the tide tables for August 22nd showed relatively moderate current flow, and Lucas had demonstrated sufficient skill during his previous weeks in the area to handle such conditions under normal circumstances. The search continued for 5 days, involving Coast Guard aircraft from as far away as Sitka and volunteer vessels from communities throughout southeast Alaska. Searchers combed hundreds of miles of coastline, knowing that southeast Alaska's complex geography could carry debris or a person dozens of miles from the initial incident location. The search dogs brought in from Juneau lost any scent trail at the water's edge near Lucas's camp, confirming that he had departed by kayak as planned, but providing no additional information about what might have happened during his final paddle. Weather conditions during the search operation included periods of dense fog that limited visibility and occasionally grounded aircraft, highlighting the challenging environment that kayakers face in southeast Alaska waters. Local fishermen participating in the search efforts noted several anomalies during the days following Lucas's disappearance, including unusual behavior by marine mammals and birds that some attributed to the presence of orcas or other large predators in the area. While predator encounters involving sea kayakers are extremely rare, the remote waters around Prince of Wales Island support populations of both orcas and stellar sea lions that could potentially pose hazards to small watercraft. The official search was suspended after a week when Coast Guard commanders determined that survival in the 50-degree water temperatures was no longer possible, even for someone wearing appropriate cold water protection. However, port protection residents continued informal searches for several more weeks, checking remote beaches and coves where debris from Lucas's kayaking gear might have washed ashore. These efforts recovered several items of equipment that were positively identified as belonging to Lucas, including a waterproof storage bag containing his journal and camera, but provided no additional clues about the circumstances of his disappearance. The investigation into Lucas's disappearance examined several potential explanations, ranging from equipment failure and medical emergency to encounters with marine wildlife or extreme weather conditions. The National Transportation Safety Board conducted a preliminary investigation into the incident, interviewing local residents and examining the recovered kayak for evidence of structural failure or impact damage. However, the investigation was hampered by the absence of witnesses and the limited physical evidence available from the scene of the disappearance. Lucas's family traveled to port protection following the unsuccessful search, seeking closure and answers that the investigation had been unable to provide. His parents established a memorial fund supporting maritime safety education and search and rescue operations in southeast Alaska, while his sister Sarah continued advocating for improved emergency communication systems in remote areas where cell phone coverage was non-existent. The family also worked with the Coast Guard to improve notification procedures for solo kayakers operating in Alaska's remote waters. The story of Lucas Avery's disappearance became part of the folklore surrounding port protection, joining other tales of mariners who had challenged Southeast Alaska's unforgiving waters and lost. Local residents speak of his case as a reminder that even experienced outdoors people can encounter hazards that prove insurmountable, and that Alaska's wilderness demands constant vigilance and respect from those who venture into its embrace. The empty beach where Lucas had established his final camp serves as an unofficial memorial to his memory, and a sobering reminder of the risks that accompany any attempt to experience Alaska's authentic wilderness. Today, Lucas Avery's disappearance remains classified as an unsolved missing persons case, though Coast Guard officials consider it most likely that he drowned following a kayaking accident in the challenging waters around El Capitan Island. His story continues to influence safety discussions among sea kayakers planning expeditions in Southeast Alaska, serving as a cautionary tale about the importance of emergency preparedness and communication systems when venturing into some of the most remote waters in North America. The mystery of what exactly happened during his final paddle may never be solved, but Lucas's legacy lives on in the improved safety practices adopted by other adventurers seeking to experience Alaska's maritime wilderness. The northern lights danced across the star-studded sky like ethereal ribbons of green and gold, casting an otherworldly glow over the remote backcountry lodge nestled deep in the Susitna Valley. Molly Winthrop pressed her face against the frosted window of her guest cabin, mesmerized by the aurora borealis display that had drawn her away from the warmth of Vermont's familiar forests to this wilderness sanctuary 60 miles northwest of Anchorage. At 43, the freelance nature photographer had built her career documenting wildlife and landscapes across North America, but Alaska's raw beauty represented the pinnacle of her artistic ambitions. The Aurora Lodge, a collection of rustic cabins accessible only by float plane or snow machine, promised the kind of pristine wilderness experience that modern tourism rarely provided. Molly had arrived at the lodge 3 days earlier aboard a vintage de Havilland Beaver float plane piloted by Jake Morrison, a taciturn Alaskan who had been flying passengers and supplies to remote locations for over 2 decades. The 40-minute flight from Anchorage had taken them over endless expanses of boreal forest punctuated by frozen lakes and mountain peaks that pierced the horizon like ancient sentinels. The Aurora Lodge sat on the shore of Mirror Lake, a pristine body of water surrounded by towering spruce trees, and accessible only during the brief summer months when aircraft could land on water or during winter when the frozen surface could support small planes equipped with skis. The lodge itself consisted of a main building housing the dining room, common area, and owner's quarters, surrounded by 8 individual guest cabins that could accommodate up to 20 visitors during peak season. During Molly's February visit, she was one of only 6 guests, sharing the remote sanctuary with 2 other photographers from California, a wildlife biologist from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and a retired couple from Minnesota who had been visiting the lodge annually for 15 years. The intimate group size created a family-like atmosphere where guests shared meals, stories, and the profound silence that characterized Alaska's winter wilderness. Lodge owner Robert Hendricks had purchased the property in 1998 after retiring from a career as a commercial airline pilot, drawn by the same pristine wilderness that attracted his guests. He had spent years upgrading the facilities while maintaining their rustic character, installing a diesel generator for electricity, a sophisticated water filtration system, and communication equipment that could reach emergency services in Anchorage despite the remote location. Hendricks prided himself on providing guests with authentic wilderness experiences while maintaining the safety standards that came from his aviation background and decades of living in Alaska's challenging environment. The evening of February 15th began like most others at the Aurora Lodge with guests gathering in the main building after dinner to share stories and watch for aurora activity through the large windows that faced north toward the Brooks Range. Molly had spent the day photographing wildlife tracks in the fresh snow, documenting the intricate patterns left by snowshoe hares, ptarmigan, and the occasional wolf pack that traversed the frozen landscape. She had captured stunning images of ice formations along the lakeshore and was planning to venture out later that night if the aurora forecast proved accurate. Weather conditions that evening were ideal for aurora viewing, with clear skies, minimal wind, and temperatures hovering around -20 degrees Fahrenheit. The National Weather Service had issued an aurora forecast predicting moderate to strong activity, and the lodge's location far from any light pollution offered unobstructed views of the northern horizon where the displays typically appeared most prominently. Molly had prepared her camera equipment earlier in the day, checking battery levels and ensuring her tripod was properly adjusted for the long exposures required to capture the aurora's ethereal movements. Around 10:30 that evening, the first faint green glow appeared on the northern horizon, gradually intensifying into the spectacular display that had drawn photographers from around the world to Alaska's winter wilderness. Molly bundled herself in multiple layers of insulation, gathered her camera gear, and stepped out into the crystalline night air that immediately began freezing the moisture in her breath. She established her photography position about 200 yards from her cabin near the lakeshore, where the aurora's reflection would create mirror images in the polished ice surface. The other guests had also ventured outside to witness the celestial display, with some choosing to watch from the heated comfort of the main lodge, while others braved the extreme cold to experience the aurora more intimately. Lodge owner Hendricks made his regular rounds to check on guests, reminding everyone about the dangers of extended cold exposure and advising them to return to heated buildings if they began experiencing any signs of hypothermia. The temperature had dropped to -25 degrees, cold enough to cause frostbite in exposed skin within minutes, and potentially fatal for anyone inadequately protected against the elements. Molly's photography session continued for nearly 2 hours as the aurora display reached peak intensity, with dancing curtains of light stretching from horizon to horizon in a cosmic performance that left her breathless with wonder. Her specialized cold weather camera equipment functioned perfectly in the extreme conditions, capturing image after image of the otherworldly phenomenon that had inspired countless legends among Alaska's indigenous peoples. She periodically returned to her cabin to warm her hands and check her equipment, but the spectacular display kept drawing her back outside despite the brutal cold. The last confirmed sighting of Molly occurred around 12:45 in the morning, when fellow photographer Dave Chen saw her adjusting her tripod near the lakeshore while the aurora activity began gradually diminishing. Chen had been photographing from a location closer to the main lodge and noticed Molly's silhouette against the starlit snow as she continued working despite the increasingly bitter cold. He considered approaching her to suggest returning to the warmth of the buildings, but decided against interrupting what appeared to be a productive photography session for someone experienced enough to manage her own safety in challenging conditions. When Molly failed to appear for breakfast the following morning, Hendricks knocked on her cabin door and discovered it unlocked with no sign that she had returned after her aurora photography session. Her camera equipment was missing, suggesting she had been carrying it when whatever incident occurred took place. The cabin showed no signs of disturbance, with her remaining gear neatly organized and her bed unslept in, indicating she had never returned from her late-night photography expedition. Most troubling was the absence of her heavy winter parka, which remained hanging in the cabin closet despite the lethal cold that would have made such protection essential for survival. The search for Molly began immediately, with Hendricks and his staff conducting an initial survey of the immediate area around the lodge while other guests checked the shoreline and nearby trails. Alaska State Troopers were notified by radio, but severe weather conditions prevented immediate helicopter support, leaving the initial search efforts to lodge personnel and guests who understood the urgency of finding someone exposed to Alaska's winter wilderness. The search was complicated by fresh snowfall that had begun around 3 in the morning, potentially covering any tracks or signs that might have indicated Molly's movements or the location where an incident had occurred. Professional search and rescue teams arrived the following day aboard snow machines and all-terrain vehicles, bringing specialized equipment and trained search dogs capable of detecting human scent even under challenging winter conditions. The teams systematically covered expanding search grids around the lodge, paying particular attention to the lakeshore area where Molly had been photographing and any terrain features that might have posed hazards during nighttime travel. Despite these extensive efforts, searchers found no trace of Molly or her camera equipment, an outcome that seemed impossible given the limited area where she could have traveled on foot in the extreme cold. The search expanded to include helicopter overflights once weather conditions improved, with aircraft equipped with thermal imaging technology that could detect heat signatures even in heavily forested terrain. Pilots familiar with Alaska's search and rescue operations noted that the pristine snow conditions should have preserved any evidence of Molly's movements, making the absence of tracks or disturbance signs particularly puzzling. The helicopter searches covered more than 50 square miles of wilderness surrounding the lodge, including remote valleys and ridgelines where someone might have wandered if disoriented by cold or equipment failure. As days passed without discovering any trace of Molly, theories about her disappearance ranged from cold weather accidents and wildlife encounters to more speculative explanations involving the mysterious phenomena that some associated with Alaska's remote wilderness areas. Lodge guests and staff reported unusual sounds during the nights following her disappearance, including distant howling that could have been wolves or wind, and unexplained lights that might have been aircraft or aurora activity. These accounts contributed to an atmosphere of unease that affected everyone at the remote lodge. The investigation revealed that Molly had been an experienced cold weather photographer who understood the dangers of Alaska's winter environment and typically took appropriate precautions when working in extreme conditions. Her camera equipment included backup batteries and cold weather protection systems that should have functioned reliably in the conditions she encountered that night. However, investigators noted that even experienced outdoors people could encounter unexpected equipment failures or medical emergencies that might lead to life-threatening situations in Alaska's unforgiving environment. The search for Molly continued for 2 weeks before being officially suspended, though lodge owner Hendricks and other local residents maintained informal searches throughout the remainder of the winter. Spring searches after the snow melted revealed no additional evidence that might explain her disappearance, leaving her family and friends without the closure they desperately sought. The Aurora Lodge continued operating, but Hendricks installed additional safety equipment and implemented more stringent guest monitoring procedures to prevent similar incidents. Today, Molly Winthrop's disappearance remains an unsolved mystery that has become part of the folklore surrounding Alaska's remote wilderness lodges. Her case serves as a sobering reminder that even experienced outdoors people can encounter hazards that prove insurmountable in Alaska's challenging environment, where help may be hours or days away and where weather conditions can change from manageable to life-threatening within minutes. The dancing aurora that drew her to that frozen lake shore continues to attract photographers and adventure seekers, but Molly's story ensures that visitors understand the respect that Alaska's wilderness demands from all who venture into its embrace. The mist hung heavy over Resurrection Bay as the massive Norwegian Star glided toward the port of Seward, its 15 decks carrying 3,400 passengers eager to experience the raw majesty of Alaska's Kenai Peninsula. Among them stood Anthony Rios, a 51-year-old civil engineer from Albuquerque, New Mexico, who had spent months planning this Alaskan cruise as a celebration of his recent divorce settlement and a chance to reconnect with the wilderness photography that had been his passion before marriage and career demands consumed his time. He leaned against the ship's railing on Deck 7, watching the towering peaks of the Chugach Mountains emerge from the morning fog like ancient guardians protecting the secrets of America's last frontier. Anthony had booked the cruise independently, seeking solitude and adventure after 23 years of marriage that had ended amicably but left him questioning the direction of his life. His ex-wife, Patricia, had received their house in Santa Fe's foothills, while Anthony kept their shared photography equipment and the freedom to pursue the travel adventures they had always postponed for more practical concerns. The Norwegian Star's 7-day inside passage itinerary promised glacier viewing, wildlife encounters, and most importantly for Anthony, access to some of Alaska's most spectacular hiking opportunities during the ship's port calls in Ketchikan, Juneau, and Seward. The ship docked in Seward at 6:30 that morning, with passengers scheduled to disembark for various shore excursions ranging from luxury coach tours to challenging backcountry adventures. Anthony had researched the area extensively, ultimately choosing a guided glacier trek to the terminus of Exit Glacier, located within Kenai Fjords National Park about 10 miles from downtown Seward. The 8-hour excursion would take participants through temperate rainforest, across rocky moraines, and finally onto the glacier itself, offering unparalleled opportunities for the landscape photography that had drawn Anthony to Alaska in the first place. The tour group consisted of 12 passengers led by Marcus Peterson, a certified wilderness guide with 15 years of experience leading visitors through Alaska's challenging terrain. Peterson briefed the group on safety protocols, weather conditions, and the physical demands of glacier travel, emphasizing that participants needed to maintain visual contact with guides at all times, due to the potential for rapidly changing conditions and hidden crevasses. Anthony impressed the guide with his quality camera equipment and his questions about optimal shooting positions, demonstrating both preparation and respect for the environment they would be entering. The initial portion of the trek proceeded smoothly, with the group hiking established trails through dense Sitka spruce forest, while Peterson provided commentary about the area's natural history and the dramatic retreat of Exit Glacier over the past century. Anthony hung back from the main group periodically to capture images of old-growth trees draped in moss and the occasional glimpse of snow-capped peaks through the forest canopy. His fellow hikers were a mix of fitness levels and ages, but all seemed capable of handling the moderate terrain that characterized the approach to the glacier. The group reached the glacier's terminus around noon, where they paused for lunch while marveling at the massive ice formation that had carved the valley over thousands of years. Anthony was particularly fascinated by the glacier's constantly changing surface, where ice flows created dramatic crevasses and ice caves that captured light in spectacular ways. He asked Peterson about accessing better photography positions, expressing particular interest in the lateral moraines that bordered the glacier, and offered elevated vantage points for capturing the ice field's full scope. Peterson agreed to lead a smaller subgroup, including Anthony and 3 other experienced hikers, to a rocky outcrop about a quarter-mile from the main glacier viewing area. The guide emphasized that this advanced position required careful attention to footing and weather conditions, as afternoon temperature changes could create unstable ice conditions and sudden fog banks that reduced visibility to mere yards. Anthony assured the guide that he understood the risks and would follow all safety protocols while pursuing his photography objectives. The advanced photography group spent approximately 90 minutes on the rocky outcrop, with Anthony capturing what he later described to fellow hikers as some of the most spectacular glacier images he had ever taken. The lighting conditions were perfect, with partial cloud cover creating dramatic contrasts between the blue-white ice and the surrounding granite peaks. Anthony's enthusiasm was evident to other group members who noticed him moving confidently among the rocks while seeking optimal shooting angles for his increasingly heavy camera bag. The group began their return journey around 3:15, with Peterson leading them back toward the main trail system that would take them to the tour bus pickup location in Seward. The weather had remained stable throughout the day, with temperatures in the mid-40s and only light winds that posed no challenges for experienced hikers. Anthony continued photographing during the return journey, occasionally asking the group to pause while he captured images of wildlife or particularly striking landscape features along the trail. The first indication that something was wrong came when the group reached the trail junction where they should have regrouped with other tour participants. A quick head count revealed that Anthony was no longer with the group, though none of the other hikers could recall exactly when they had last seen him. Peterson immediately implemented emergency protocols, dividing the remaining hikers into search teams while using his satellite communication device to contact park rangers and the Norwegian Star's shore excursion coordinators. The initial search focused on the route between the rocky outcrop and the trail junction, covering approximately half a mile of varied terrain that included both established trails and off-trail areas where Anthony might have wandered while seeking photography opportunities. Search teams called his name repeatedly while looking for any signs of his passage, including dropped equipment or disturbed vegetation that might indicate where he had left the main group. The search was complicated by the terrain's complex topography, which included numerous side valleys and rock formations where someone could easily become separated from their companions. Park rangers arrived within 2 hours, bringing additional personnel and specialized search equipment, including avalanche beacons that could detect electronic devices at considerable distances. The Rangers established a command post at the Exit Glacier Visitor Center while coordinating with the Coast Guard, Alaska State Troopers, and volunteer search and rescue teams from the Seward area. The Norwegian Star delayed its departure while ship personnel contacted Anthony's emergency contacts and coordinated with search coordinators about extending the search window. The search operation expanded dramatically on the second day, with helicopter crews from the Alaska National Guard joining ground teams that had worked through the night despite challenging weather conditions. The helicopters carried thermal imaging equipment capable of detecting human heat signatures through forest canopies and cloud cover, technology that had proven successful in previous Alaskan search operations. However, the complex terrain around Exit Glacier presented unique challenges for both ground and aerial searchers, with numerous valleys and rock formations that could hide someone from detection. Search teams discovered Anthony's camera on the third day, found approximately 1 mile from where he had last been seen by fellow tour participants. The camera was located in a steep-sided ravine that had been carved by glacial meltwater, sitting on rocks about 30 feet below the rim where Anthony might have been photographing the scenic gorge. The camera appeared undamaged and contained hundreds of images from Anthony's Alaska cruise, including spectacular shots taken during his final glacier trek that documented his movements up until the time of his disappearance. The discovery location raised troubling questions about what had happened to Anthony after he became separated from his tour group. The ravine where his camera was found offered dramatic photography opportunities with a small waterfall and interesting rock formations that would have appealed to someone seeking unique landscape images. However, the steep terrain would have required extreme caution to access safely, and the loose rock surfaces could have created hazardous conditions for anyone attempting to climb down for better shooting positions. Analysis of the images stored on Anthony's camera revealed a progression of photographs taken throughout the day, with the final images captured at the rocky outcrop where the tour group had spent time before beginning their return journey. Camera timestamp data suggested that Anthony had continued photographing after the group began moving, potentially explaining how he had become separated from his companions. The final images showed no signs of distress or emergency conditions, suggesting that whatever incident occurred had happened after Anthony stopped taking photographs. The search continued for 8 days, involving more than 50 personnel and covering over 20 square miles of challenging wilderness terrain. Searchers utilized trained search dogs, helicopter overflights, ground-penetrating radar, and even divers who explored deep pools in the glacial streams where Anthony might have fallen. Despite these extensive efforts, no trace of Anthony himself was ever found. leaving investigators with more questions than answers about what had happened to the experienced hiker and photographer. The Norwegian Star eventually continued its itinerary after coordinating with Anthony's family and ensuring that all possible search resources remained committed to finding him. Cruise line representatives worked with law enforcement agencies to interview other passengers who might have interacted with Anthony during the voyage, seeking any information that might explain his disappearance or provide leads for the ongoing investigation. The ship's security footage confirmed Anthony's participation in the shore excursion but provided no additional insights into his state of mind or intentions. Today, Anthony Rios remains officially listed as a missing person, with Alaska State Troopers maintaining an open case file that includes all evidence collected during the extensive search operation. His disappearance has influenced safety protocols for glacier tours in the Seward area, with guides now implementing more stringent procedures for maintaining group cohesion and accounting for all participants throughout challenging terrain. The mystery of what happened to Anthony in those final moments serves as a sobering reminder that Alaska's wilderness can claim even experienced visitors who understand and respect its dangers, leaving families and investigators searching for answers that may never come. The camera's memory card would later reveal that Samantha Harding had captured her final photographs at 11:47 in the evening on September 3, 2022. As the aurora borealis painted the Arctic sky in shades of emerald and violet above the frozen tundra surrounding Utqiagvik, Alaska. The 29-year-old travel blogger from Baltimore had spent 6 days documenting life in America's northernmost community, formerly known as Barrow, sharing her experiences with an online following of nearly 40,000 subscribers who eagerly awaited her posts from some of the world's most remote destinations. Her last Instagram story, posted just hours before she vanished, showed her bundled in Arctic gear beside a frozen river, promising her followers the most spectacular Northern Lights footage they had ever seen. Samantha had built her reputation as an adventure travel blogger by seeking out destinations that other content creators avoided, places where luxury accommodations and reliable internet connections gave way to authentic cultural experiences and natural phenomena that could only be witnessed in the world's most isolated corners. Her blog, titled Wandering Beyond Borders, documented journeys to Mongolia's Gobi Desert, Iceland's volcanic highlands, and the remote villages of northern Norway. Alaska represented the culmination of her Arctic exploration series, a months-long project that had taken her from the temperate rainforests of southeast Alaska to the windswept tundra of the North Slope. The journey to Utqiagvik required careful planning and significant financial investment, as the community sits more than 300 miles north of the Arctic Circle and can only be reached by commercial flights from Anchorage or Fairbanks. Samantha had spent weeks coordinating with local guides and cultural liaisons, ensuring that her documentation of Inupiaq traditional life would be respectful and accurate. She had obtained the necessary permits for drone photography and invested in specialized Arctic camera equipment designed to function in temperatures that could drop to -40 degrees Fahrenheit even during the brief summer months. Her accommodation at the Top of the World Hotel placed her in the heart of Utqiagvik, a community of approximately 4,000 people who had adapted to life in one of Earth's most challenging environments. The hotel served as a gathering place for visitors ranging from climate researchers and oil industry workers to the occasional adventure tourist willing to pay premium prices for authentic Arctic experiences. Samantha quickly established relationships with local residents, including traditional whaling captain Moses Kanguk and his family, who agreed to share their knowledge of subsistence hunting and the cultural traditions that sustained Inupiaq communities through countless generations of Arctic survival. Her daily routine involved early morning photography sessions to capture the unique quality of Arctic light, followed by interviews with community members about their adaptation to climate change and the preservation of traditional knowledge. Samantha's blog posts from Utqiagvik reveal genuine respect for the challenges facing Arctic communities, avoiding the sensationalism that characterized many outsider accounts of life in extreme environments. She documented the construction techniques that allowed buildings to survive on permanently frozen ground, the complex logistics required to supply a community accessible only by air or sea, and the sophisticated traditional knowledge that enabled successful subsistence hunting in conditions that would quickly prove fatal to unprepared visitors. September 3rd marked the beginning of Samantha's final planned expedition, a solo photography journey to document the landscape surrounding Utqiagvik during the brief transition period between the endless daylight of Arctic summer and the approaching polar night. She had rented an all-terrain vehicle from a local outfitter, equipped with GPS navigation, emergency communication equipment, and survival supplies appropriate for extended travel on the tundra. Her planned route would take her approximately 15 miles southeast of town to the banks of the Mead River, where she hoped to capture images of caribou migration and the dramatic interplay between tundra vegetation and the approaching winter freeze. The weather forecast called for clear skies and temperatures in the low 20s, ideal conditions for the aurora photography that had drawn Samantha to Utqiagvik during the autumn equinox period when geomagnetic activity typically peaks. She departed the hotel around 4 in the afternoon, allowing sufficient time to reach her planned camping location and establish her photography equipment before darkness provided optimal conditions for capturing the northern lights. Her GPS device was programmed with waypoints marking her intended route and emergency shelter locations, while her satellite communicator provided two-way messaging capability with search and rescue coordinators in Anchorage. Local residents who saw Samantha departing remembered her enthusiasm about the planned photography session, as well as her careful preparation and respect for the Arctic environment that had claimed the lives of numerous visitors over the years. She carried redundant navigation systems, emergency shelter, and sufficient food and fuel for 3 days, following the survival protocols that experienced Arctic travelers consider essential for any journey beyond the immediate vicinity of permanent settlements. Her all-terrain vehicle was equipped with tracks rather than wheels, providing the flotation necessary for travel across tundra that could be deceptively soft, despite appearing solid and stable. The last confirmed GPS ping from Samantha's devices occurred at 10:32 that evening, placing her approximately 12 miles southeast of Utqiagvik, near the planned photography location beside the Mead River. The signal indicated normal device function and suggested that Samantha had successfully reached her intended destination and was presumably beginning her aurora photography session. Weather conditions at the time remained within acceptable parameters, with clear skies, light winds, and aurora activity that would have provided the spectacular displays she had traveled thousands of miles to document. When Samantha failed to return to Utqiagvik by her planned departure time the following afternoon, hotel staff contacted local authorities who initiated emergency protocols for overdue travelers in the Arctic environment. The North Slope Borough Search and Rescue Coordinator assembled a team of volunteers familiar with the terrain between Utqiagvik and the Mead River, while Alaska State Troopers prepared to deploy additional resources if the initial search efforts proved unsuccessful. The urgency of the situation was heightened by weather forecasts predicting deteriorating conditions that could make search operations extremely dangerous for both the missing person and rescue personnel. The search team located Samantha's abandoned all-terrain vehicle around noon on September 5th, approximately 2 miles from the last GPS coordinates and showing no obvious signs of mechanical failure or accident. The vehicle was properly parked and secured with Samantha's emergency supplies still inside, along with most of her camera equipment. However, her primary camera, tripod, and cold weather clothing were missing, suggesting that she had departed the vehicle voluntarily for what was intended to be a temporary photography expedition. Most puzzling was the absence of any tracks leading away from the vehicle, as the soft tundra should have preserved clear evidence of her direction of travel. The discovery of Samantha's camera equipment came 2 days later, found by searchers approximately 1 mile northwest of her vehicle near a small lake that offered dramatic foreground elements for aurora photography. The camera and tripod were positioned as if Samantha had been actively photographing when something caused her to abandon the equipment. The camera's memory card contained hundreds of images documenting her journey to Utqiagvik, including spectacular aurora photographs taken throughout the night of September 3rd that demonstrated both her technical skill and artistic vision as a photographer. Analysis of the final images revealed increasingly spectacular aurora displays that would have required Samantha to remain outside for extended periods while adjusting camera settings and composition. The timestamps indicated continuous photography activity until 11:47, when the image sequence abruptly stopped with no obvious technical malfunction or environmental factor that would have prevented continued shooting. The final photograph showed a particularly dramatic aurora curtain stretching across the entire sky, suggesting that conditions remained excellent for photography when whatever incident occurred took place. Search efforts expanded to include helicopter overflights equipped with thermal imaging technology, ground teams using trained search dogs, and underwater search specialists who examined the lake near where Samantha's camera was found. The search covered more than 100 square miles of tundra, utilizing techniques developed specifically for Arctic search and rescue operations, where vast distances and extreme weather conditions create unique challenges. Despite these extensive efforts, no trace of Samantha herself was ever discovered, leaving investigators with more questions than answers about her final hours in the Arctic wilderness. The investigation attracted attention from Samantha's substantial online following, with her blog subscribers and social media followers organizing their own research efforts to analyze her final posts and GPS data for any clues that professional searchers might have overlooked. Online investigators noted anomalies in her final photographs, including unexplained light sources that did not appear to be consistent with aurora phenomena. Though image analysis experts could not conclusively determine whether these represented technical artifacts or actual environmental conditions at the photography site. Local Inupiaq elders shared traditional knowledge about the dangers that could befall travelers in the Arctic landscape, including sudden weather changes, disorientation caused by the featureless terrain, and the psychological effects of extended exposure to the profound silence and isolation that characterize the tundra environment.